Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. We're diving into a chilling case about someone who caused a bloodbath in a peaceful town. When a crime happens in a small, quiet place where everyone knows each other, it quickly becomes the talk of the town. But if it's a brutal attack on an entire family, something that's never happened before, it doesn't just get people talking, it leads to rumors, speculations, and gruesome stories that eventually become an urban legend. This tragic event took place in the fall of 2010 in a small Australian town called Kapunda, with a population of only 3,000. It's located near the Light River and Barossa Valley in South Australia. The whole town was shocked by the horrific news of a family being massacred. The local police, who had never seen anything like this, were left baffled. Rumors quickly spread, and the story was told in many different ways. Things got so out of control that the police had to partially classify the case to avoid further panic and prevent leaks. The family involved was well known and respected in the town. They had no known enemies, and there seemed to be no clear motive for the crime. At first, it appeared to be a senseless act of violence, leading detectives to believe it might have been the work of a madman. Surprisingly, the real culprit wasn't even considered a suspect at first, and might have gotten away with it if he hadn't accidentally revealed himself later on. Let's talk about the Rowe family. The head of the family, Andrew Rowe, was born in England in 1965. When he was just 3 years old, he and his parents moved to Australia, where they decided to stay. They settled in a suburb of Adelaide, and Andrew grew up there, attending school. He was known to be friendly, had a great sense of humor, made lots of friends, and enjoyed fishing with his dad. After high school, while studying in Adelaide, Andrew met Rose, a cheerful young woman just a year younger than him. The two quickly developed a romantic relationship, and in 1985, they got married in a small ceremony with only close friends and family. 2 years later, in 1987, they had their first child, a boy named Christopher. In 1994, Andrew and Rose Rowe welcomed their second child, a daughter named Chantel. The family settled in the quiet town of Kapunda and started their own carpet cleaning business. The business thrived, giving them financial stability. Their children attended local schools, where both performed well academically. Christopher, their eldest son, took up guitar and became interested in music, while Chantel excelled in painting, danced, and played basketball. She was known for being kind-hearted and always willing to help others. Chantel dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and Christopher planned to pursue a career in programming and technology. The Rowe family was close-knit and happy. By the summer of 2010, 23-year-old Christopher had moved out to live with his girlfriend, just a few blocks away. In September, 16-year-old Chantel started working part-time as a waitress at a roadside cafe. Since she didn't have her driver's license yet, her father or brother would drive her to work, though she looked forward to getting her own license soon. The crime scene was so horrifying that even seasoned detectives from Adelaide were shocked. Inside the house, it looked like a scene from a horror movie, with blood splattered everywhere on the floor, walls, furniture, curtains, and even the ceiling. The bodies of 45-year-old Andrew and 44-year-old Rose were found in the kitchen, severely disfigured, while Chantel's body lay in her bedroom, brutally torn. Each family member had suffered multiple stab wounds and had been dead long before the police and paramedics arrived. Detectives quickly suspected that the crime was personal, as nothing was stolen. Valuables like phones, a laptop, an expensive camera, and even money were left in plain sight. This suggested that the killer wasn't motivated by robbery. The brutality also hinted that more than one person might have been involved, as it would have been difficult for a single individual to overpower 3 adults. Alternatively, the perpetrator could have been a physically strong man. Investigators noticed that someone had clumsily tried to clean the crime scene, wiping away footprints in some areas, but the attempt was abandoned. Bloody shoe prints were also found leading to the door, but they suddenly stopped, implying the killer might have removed his shoes and left in socks. There were no signs of forced entry, which suggested that the family had likely known the killer and willingly let him inside, or he had entered through some other means. The family had no known enemies, leaving everyone puzzled as to who could have committed such a horrific crime. Some clear fingerprints were found on the door to Chantel's room, but they didn't match anyone in the police database, indicating that the person responsible had never been caught for any previous crimes. The house was immediately sealed off as a crime scene, and the surrounding area was fenced off to keep away curious onlookers and the press, who had quickly gathered at the scene. To avoid scaring the killer into hiding or fleeing, the police chose not to release too many details about the investigation. Still, rumors of a maniac spread quickly through the small town. People became fearful, avoiding the streets at night and locking their doors tightly. As strange as it sounds, the first person suspected of the crime was Christopher, the only surviving family member. At the time of the was on vacation with his fiancée in Moreton Bay, Queensland, on the Pacific coast. However, authorities had to investigate all possibilities, no matter how unlikely they seemed. Christopher was the first to raise the alarm when he couldn't get in touch with his family, and he took the next flight home after hearing the devastating news. His alibi and fingerprints were quickly checked, and it was confirmed that he was on the other side of the continent at the time of the crime, so he was ruled out as a suspect. A strange detail emerged from the investigation after the murders. The killer changed into clean clothes and lay on the bed. Bloody drag marks near Chantel's bed indicated that she had likely tried to hide under it, but the killer had pulled her out. Forensic experts also determined that she had been sexually assaulted before her death. This further suggested that the crime was deeply personal, filled with senseless cruelty. Andrew, the head of the family, suffered over 30 stab wounds while Rose was stabbed 50 times. Evidence showed she had been attacked twice and had even tried to call for help after the first attack. Chantel had 33 stab wounds and had been sexually assaulted. Investigators immediately looked into Chantel's personal life, focusing on whether she had been in a relationship or had any obsessive admirers. It was soon revealed that she had been dating a boy named Dylan for about a year. They both attended the same school, and at 16 years old, Dylan didn't initially seem capable of committing such a brutal crime. Nonetheless, detectives needed to interview him, check his alibi, and hear his thoughts on whether anyone might have wanted to harm Chantel or her family. Dylan cooperated fully with the police, expressing his deep grief over Chantel's death. He explained that they had a loving relationship and planned to marry once they were older. He was devastated by her loss and didn't know how to cope. At the time of the murders, Dylan had been in a nearby city attending his grandfather's anniversary. His alibi was confirmed by dozens of witnesses, and he was ruled out as a suspect. The police had few leads but now had the killer's fingerprints, as well as DNA from the seminal fluid found on Chantel's body. This gave them a crucial piece of evidence that could eventually help them identify the murderer. The DNA extracted from the seminal fluid and fingerprints left at the scene did not match anyone in the police database, adding to the mystery. Interestingly, the family was killed with knives from their own kitchen, suggesting that the attack may not have been premeditated, but rather a spontaneous act of violence. The killer took the murder weapons with him when he left the house. Forensic experts determined the time of death to be between midnight and 2 a.m. A neighbor of the Rowe family reported hearing Rose call for help twice around 1 a.m., followed by a loud thud, but assumed it was a domestic dispute and did not call the police. No strangers were seen near the house that night, and officers meticulously searched the area for any clues or the missing murder weapons. The police also reached out to the local community through the media, asking for any information that could help with the investigation. However, this led to an overwhelming number of tips, many of which were unhelpful or false. People called in to report suspicious individuals, strange cars, and even tried to link the crime to local biker gangs or drug dealers. There were also tips about social media posts from local residents, but none of these leads advanced the investigation. 2 days before the murders, detectives discovered Chantal's expensive camera at the crime scene. Since Chantal was an avid photographer, they hoped the camera might contain useful images. Indeed, they found many pictures, and the most recent ones drew their attention. On November 6th, just 2 days before the massacre, Chantal had hosted a small gathering at her home. Her parents had gone to stay with relatives for the night, so she took advantage of their absence to invite her boyfriend and 3 close friends, along with their partners, for a quiet evening of movie watching and a barbecue. It wasn't a wild party, just a calm, friendly get-together. Chantal took numerous photos that night, capturing everyone enjoying themselves. Some of the guests even posted pictures from the evening on their social media pages, which the police examined for any potential clues. All of Chantal's friends who attended the party stayed overnight at the row house and left the next morning, with Andrew and Rose even cooking breakfast for everyone. Detectives realized it was crucial to interview everyone who had been at the party to see if Chantal had any enemies, envious peers, or stalkers. They also decided to collect fingerprints from each person to compare them with the prints found on Chantal's bedroom door. Chantal's friends were still in shock over the murders, but fully cooperated with the investigation. They came to the station to testify, provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, which didn't match the ones found at the crime scene, and allowed the police to access their social media accounts and phones. They recounted the events of what ended up being the last party at the row house. Dylan recalled that on Sunday, Chantal wasn't feeling well and likely had a cold. By the evening, she had developed a fever and called her boss to let him know she wouldn't be able to work the next day. The following morning, at around 5 a.m., Dylan texted her to ask how she was feeling. He saw that his message had been read, but Chantal never responded. What Dylan didn't know at the time was that Chantal and her parents were already dead and the killer had read his message. In a chilling detail, the police discovered that the killer had even tried to respond to Dylan's text, but Chantal's phone account had run out of credit, so the message was never sent. The killer had attempted to create the illusion that Chantal was still alive. Dylan, along with several of Chantal's closest friends, helped the police compile a list of everyone she had been in contact with. Law enforcement systematically worked their way down the list, questioning and checking each person. About a week into the investigation, they reached an 18-year-old named Jason Downey who had previously attended the same high school as Chantal and Dylan. He had graduated the previous year and was now working at a local auto repair shop. Initially, Jason didn't raise any red flags. He was of average height, very thin, and appeared completely harmless. The plan was to ask him a few questions and then let him go. However, during the interview, Jason began to act strangely. Instead of answering the detective's standard questions directly, he became increasingly nervous and his behavior started to raise suspicions. On November 4, 2010, Christopher left for a vacation to Brisbane with his girlfriend, intending to return and prepare for their upcoming wedding. However, on November 8th, Christopher couldn't reach his family and grew increasingly concerned. After learning from his father's office that Andrew hadn't shown up for work, Christopher sensed something was wrong. He asked a friend to check on the house. Around 3 p.m. that day, a patrol car arrived at the row home. When the local police, who were unprepared for such a crime, saw the horrific scene inside, they immediately requested backup, realizing they were dealing with a brutal triple murder. Jason Downey began acting oddly during the police interview. He complained about not being invited to Chantal's party, mentioning that everyone else had a partner and he didn't have a girlfriend. Then, out of nowhere, he claimed to have an alibi for the night of the murders, even though no one had asked about it yet. His odd behavior made the police even more suspicious. As a result, they decided to fully investigate him, including taking his fingerprints and DNA sample. Surprisingly, Downey remained calm and cooperative, agreeing to all the tests without showing any nervousness. This behavior caused the police to briefly doubt their suspicions, but they continued with the procedures. When an expert collected his fingerprints, he noticed fresh, deep cuts on Jason's palms. Downey explained that he had hurt himself while working at the machine shop, but the cuts looked as if they had been made by a thin, sharp object. When the fingerprint results came back, they showed that Downey's prints matched the ones found on Chantal's bedroom door. All that remained was to wait for the DNA results, which would due in 2 days. The police questioned Downey again, asking how his fingerprints ended up in the Rowe family house if he hadn't been there recently. Downey calmly explained that he had visited the house with Dylan about a month and a half earlier, suggesting that's when he might have left the prints. However, this explanation didn't hold up as the prints were fresh and clean, not old or faded. On November 16, 2010, the DNA results came in, confirming that Jason Downey had assaulted Chantal that night and was responsible for the murders of her and her parents. But the question remained, why had he done it? And how did this skinny young man find the strength and rage to commit such a brutal act? Jason was arrested that same day. Now, the detectives needed to uncover the motive behind this horrific massacre. Who was Jason Downey? Jason Downey was born in September 1992 in the Scottish town of Kilmarnock, where he spent his childhood and early teen years. He was the youngest of 2 children and was raised alongside his older brother Jamie. When Jason was just 8 months old, his parents divorced and his mother, Lorraine, took on the role of raising him. His father remarried soon after, and Jason and Jamie had a half-sister named Judy, though they had little contact with her. When Jason was 13, he, his mother, and his brother emigrated to Australia, where they settled in the small town of Kapunda. In their new home, Jason's mother remarried, this time to a local resident. Jason Downey had a difficult time adjusting to life in the small town of Kapunda after growing up in a big city. He despised the quiet provincial atmosphere and longed to leave. At school, Jason struggled socially. His peers found him strange, and most only spoke to him out of pity. He was overly talkative, arrogant, and frequently lied, boasting about his imaginary athletic abilities, popularity, and supposed admirers. In reality, girls ignored him and his odd behavior repelled others. Dylan, Chantal's boyfriend, played on the same basketball team as Jason and felt sorry for him. Out of kindness, Dylan started inviting Jason to friendly gatherings and even introduced him to Chantal, a decision that would have disastrous consequences. Chantal, who was polite and empathetic, treated Jason kindly, and she had even defended him from other teenagers on occasion. Her friendly demeanor, however, led Jason to develop an intense crush on her, which soon turned into an unhealthy obsession. Jason began to believe that Chantal harbored secret feelings for him but couldn't express them because of her relationship with Dylan. Although Chantal never encouraged Jason's advances or gave him any reason to hope, he misinterpreted her kindness. Over time, his infatuation morphed into a delusional fantasy in which he believed that he and Chantal were meant to be together. Jason became consumed by these thoughts, mistaking her politeness for love, while no one around him noticed the depth of his obsession. Once the police were certain that Jason was responsible for the murders, they knew they had to act quickly to arrest him. However, they were unsure of how best to proceed, fearing that Jason could pose a danger to himself or others. To avoid any potential complications, they decided to lure him to the police station under a benign pretext. When Jason arrived, he was immediately placed in handcuffs, but surprisingly, he showed no emotion. He wasn't startled, scared, or angry. He remained completely calm. During his first interrogation, Jason denied all accusations. He tried to explain away the evidence, claiming that he had left his fingerprints in the Rowe family home during his previous visit a month and a half earlier. When questioned about how his DNA was found on Chantal's body, Jason made a desperate claim. He said that during that same visit, he and Chantal had consensual intimacy. However, this story was easily disproven. The forensic evidence made it clear that the seminal fluid found on Chantal's body could not have remained there for such a long period, either inside or outside her body. This false narrative further exposed Jason's lies and guilt. Jason Downey's confession revealed a disturbing sequence of events that led to the brutal murders of Chantal and her parents. After an argument with his mother and stepfather, Jason claimed he decided to sleep in his car. However, after speaking with Dylan, who mentioned Chantal was sick and staying home, Jason became obsessed with seeing her. His initial plan was simply to drive by her house and look through the windows, something he had done many times before due to his fixation on her. When Jason arrived at the Rowe family's home, it was dark inside, so he parked his car at the end of the street and returned on foot. He found a small bathroom window left open, and being thin, he was able to squeeze through it without much difficulty. Once inside, Jason sat quietly in the bathroom for about half an hour, listening to ensure that everyone in the house had gone to bed. Jason later claimed that his intention was to confess his feelings to Chantal. However, he took a knife from the kitchen before entering her bedroom, a fact he could not explain logically. Investigators believe that Jason had more sinister intentions from the beginning, likely planning to use the knife to threaten and control Chantel in order to fulfill his obsessive desires. When Jason entered Chantel's room and attempted to assault her, she resisted. This resistance triggered a violent rage in Jason, leading him to stab her repeatedly. The horrific attack woke her parents, Andrew and Rose, who rushed to help their daughter. However, Jason, now in a frenzied state, turned his knife on them as well, brutally stabbing both Andrew and Rose to death. In his confession, Jason claimed he acted out of an uncontrollable passion, but the calculated nature of his actions sneaking into the house, bringing a weapon, and murdering not just Chantel but her parents suggested otherwise. His confession did little to minimize his guilt, despite his attempts to downplay his responsibility. As the investigation progressed, more damning evidence against Jason surfaced. A pair of blood-stained shoes was found discarded in a deserted area, and the blood on them matched that of all three victims. The sole prints from these shoes matched the bloody footprints found at the crime scene, and inside the shoes were traces of Jason's sweat, further implicating him. Despite Jason's attempts to cooperate with investigators promising, for example, to show them where he had disposed of the knives used in the murders, the murder weapons were never recovered, leading detectives to suspect that he was still trying to manipulate the situation. Jason's confession did help reconstruct the timeline of events, but it did little to change the gruesome reality of his crime. His obsession with Chantel, combined with his inability to control his urges, had driven him to commit an unimaginable act of violence, wiping out an entire family in the process. The trial of Jason Downey concluded with a sentence that echoed the severity of his crimes. In the fall of 2011, nearly a year after the brutal murders of Chantel Rowe and her parents, Jason stood trial. Throughout the proceedings, he remained emotionless, often changing his testimony and showing no remorse for his actions. He continued to claim that he had no memory of killing the Rowe family and insisted that he had loved Chantel, even though his actions told a much darker story. One detail that stood out during the trial was that after the massacre, Jason had taken Chantel's pendant and chain, which were later found during a search of his room and car. This act underscored his obsession with her as he tried to keep a piece of her with him, even after her death. Despite his claim that the tragedy could have been avoided if Chantel had invited him to the party she hosted before her death, it was clear that his feelings of rejection and obsession had driven him to commit the horrific act. Throughout the trial, Jason maintained a calm and indifferent demeanor. He ultimately pleaded guilty, hoping for a lighter sentence. He openly admitted to his brother that this was the reason for his guilty plea to avoid life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, on April 19, 2012, Jason Downey was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Had he not pleaded guilty, he would have had to serve at least 45 years before being eligible for parole. Chantel's brother, Christopher Rowe, who lost his entire family in the massacre, expressed that while he believed the punishment was just, no court sentence could ever heal the pain of losing his loved ones. In memory of his parents and sister, Christopher had their names tattooed on his body. Despite the grief and tragedy, Christopher has since found a way to rebuild his life. He is now married and raising his son, Kobe, honoring the memory of his family while moving forward with his own. The case left an indelible mark on all involved, with Jason Downey's lack of remorse and cold demeanor continuing to haunt those who followed the trial. Story 2. The daily news of crimes can sometimes be so cruel that it shakes even the strongest people. These shocking events make us question human behavior and morality. However, it's crucial to remember that such incidents are rare. Most people in society are peaceful. This story involves two individuals whose actions crossed cultural boundaries, resulting in the tragic deaths of two people. The incident happened in Sweden and highlighted ongoing societal issues. Saga, a 20-year-old woman, was 7 months pregnant at the time. She was in a 2-year relationship with Mega Maiden Ibrahim, whom she affectionately called Amin. He was the father of her unborn child, and the couple was eagerly awaiting their baby boy. According to doctors, the pregnancy was going smoothly, and Saga was thrilled to become a mother. She was preparing with excitement, decorating the baby's room, shopping for essentials, and doing exercises. Saga shared her joy on social media, posting pictures of her growing belly and the baby clothes she bought. Her mother, Melissa, often visited to support her. On December 28th, the day before the tragedy, Saga told Melissa that Amin would visit so they could talk. Their relationship had recently become tense, and Amin didn't visit as often. Respecting their privacy, Melissa chose not to interfere. Saga was a kind, bright, and well-mannered young woman who got along easily with others. She had many admirers because of her beauty, but dreamed of building a happy family. Melissa, however, had concerns about Amin. His Somali background introduced cultural differences, which Saga had mentioned caused problems in their relationship. Melissa was surprised and uneasy when she met Amin at her home, aware of the challenges Saga might face in the relationship. Despite the challenges in her relationship, Saga remained full of optimism and hope. She deeply loved Amin and worked hard to keep their bond strong, even though she felt hurt that he kept her a secret from his family. This caused frequent arguments between them. On the afternoon of April 29, 2023, Saga's mother, Melissa Alorg, visited her daughter's apartment in the city of U, located 100 kilometers from Stockholm. Melissa planned to help Saga with preparations for the baby's arrival and pick up some items. When she arrived, she was talking on the phone with her other daughter. She rang the doorbell but got no response. After several tries, she called and texted Saga, but there was still no answer. Melissa assumed Saga might have forgotten about the visit and gone out. Though this was unusual, Melissa had a spare key and decided to enter the apartment, not wanting to disturb the couple. As she approached the door, she noticed it was unlocked, which immediately raised alarm bells. Saga was always cautious, locking the door even for a quick trip to check the mail or use the laundry room. Entering the apartment, Melissa heard water running in the kitchen. She turned off the faucet and called out for her daughter, but there was no reply. Moving toward the living room where the lights were off, she noticed something strange. Turning on the light, she was met with a horrifying sight. Saga was lying on the floor, pale and motionless. Her hair covered her face, and a table lamp cord was tightly wrapped around her neck. To Melissa's shock, a heavy table had overturned, pressing down on Saga's throat. Melissa screamed in terror and rushed to her daughter. She managed to push the table away and remove the cord from Saga's neck. In a panic, she called an ambulance and tried to revive Saga with CPR. However, it was clear that her daughter's body was cold to the touch, indicating she had been dead for some time. Despite her efforts, Melissa was unable to bring her daughter back. The ambulance arrived quickly, but it was already too late. As expected, when the medics arrived, they could only confirm the deaths of the young woman and her unborn child. Police officers examined the apartment and Saga's carefully. They found injuries on her head and face, with clotted blood tangled in her hair. While there were no clear signs of a struggle, some furniture was displaced and jewelry boxes lay overturned, their contents scattered across the floor. Interestingly, there were no indications of forced entry, leading detectives to initially consider the possibility of suicide. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. Investigations into Saga's phone data and conversations, along with insights from her family, made it clear that she had no mental health issues and was full of joy and anticipation for her baby. Suicide was entirely out of character for her. Forensic experts collected fingerprints and DNA samples from the scene, including traces found under Saga's nails and on the furniture. The autopsy revealed that Saga had died from strangulation, with her time of death estimated between 1 and 3 in the morning. Her unborn baby boy, weighing 1.7 kilograms, was found to be perfectly healthy, which only deepened the tragedy. Melissa, overwhelmed with grief and anger, demanded justice for her daughter and grandson. The horrifying event shocked Saga's family and friends, who struggled to believe that someone so close could commit such a brutal act. Saga had no connections to the criminal world, and her tragic death felt incomprehensible. Detectives immediately launched an investigation, starting with interviews of Saga's family members. Melissa shared that on April 28th, Saga had planned to meet some friends at a local restaurant, and Melissa had joined them as well. During the gathering, Melissa noticed her daughter was unusually anxious, constantly checking her phone. Saga appeared preoccupied and admitted she was waiting for a message from Amin. Saga confided in her mother that Amin was finally planning to introduce her to his family. However, he was deeply worried about how they would react to her pregnancy, especially since they weren't married. According to Saga, Amin was under immense pressure and seemed on the verge of a breakdown. Amin was deeply worried that his family, strict Somali Muslims with conservative beliefs, would not accept his relationship with Saga. Saga, on the other hand, was half Thai, half European, and a Swedish citizen with modern views. The cultural and differences between their families often led to tension. Amin, though raised in Europe and more progressive than his parents, still respected their traditions, which added to the strain. Like many of his fellow hammerhammers, he smiled when he thought about it. After visiting the restaurant, Saga said goodbye to her mother and friends. They wished her well, not knowing it would be their last time seeing her alive. Detectives later discovered that Saga was killed after she returned home. Investigators theorized that Amin might have disclosed his relationship to his family, which could have provoked a violent reaction leading to the tragedy. Early in the investigation, Amin's family members were scrutinized. His mother's behavior raised suspicion as she was seen leaving her home late that evening. However, it was confirmed that she had only gone to the store and returned within 15 minutes. His best friend said no evidence linked her or any family members to the crime. Amin's mother had shown hostility toward him after learning about his relationship. The situation worsened when she found out that Amin's car had been parked near Saga's home. By then, his family had suspected he was seeing a Christian woman. Furious, his mother told Amin he was no longer welcome in their house, believing that breaking family traditions warranted severing ties. Amin managed to convince her that he hadn't visited Saga, but it was a difficult conversation. Melissa revealed that tensions between Saga and Amin grew worse after Saga's pregnancy. There were rumors that Amin had pressured Saga to have an abortion, fearing his family's disapproval. However, Saga stood firm in her decision to keep the baby. She told her mother that if necessary, she was prepared to raise her child alone. This determination, paired with the joy she felt about becoming a mother, made the tragic events that followed even harder to comprehend. In October, Saga shared the news of her pregnancy with her family, who were overjoyed, just as she was. However, during this time, her relationship with Amin grew strained. Saga frequently expressed frustration over the cultural differences between them, feeling that without a change in Amin's perspective, their relationship couldn't last. Despite these challenges, things seemed to improve after a few months. Amin appeared to accept and even seemed happy about becoming a father. Saga decided to move into a larger apartment to accommodate her growing family. She began setting up a nursery and preparing for her baby's arrival. By March 2023, their relationship was still intact, though troubling incidents arose. One such incident involved a woman named Deanna, who approached Saga privately. Deanna claimed that Amin had tried to persuade her to attack Saga, suggesting she kick Saga in the stomach to miscarriage. When confronted, Amin vehemently denied the accusation, calling it a lie. Melissa was aware of these unsettling events, which left her deeply concerned for her daughter. As the police pieced together the events leading to Saga's death, they found that on April 27th, Saga and Amin had planned to spend the evening together. However, Amin avoided her, claiming he was delayed at work. This behavior led Saga to issue an ultimatum. He had to tell his family about their relationship, her pregnancy, and her new apartment, or their relationship would end. The following day, April 28th, both Saga and Amin were busy with work, but kept in touch via messages. Melissa later noted that Saga seemed unusually anxious, likely due to the ongoing tensions with Amin. Police investigations into Saga's phone revealed that their conversation remained active until around 11 p.m. At 11:15 p.m., Amin messaged Saga, telling her he wouldn't tell his family about their relationship or the baby. He explained that his family's approval was more important to him than an extramarital child. Saga was clearly upset by his decision and tried to convince him otherwise. She reasoned that his family would eventually find out about the child, especially if they broke up, as she planned to seek financial support from him. Amin's last message to Saga indicated he was extremely anxious, claiming his heart felt like it might jump out of his chest. This was the final communication before Saga was killed. Detectives believed her persistence and the risk of her revealing their relationship to his family gave Amin a compelling motive for the attack. As the sole suspect in the case, Amin was brought in for questioning. The 22-year-old denied any involvement in Saga's death. He claimed that on the night of the murder, he had gone to his family to confess his relationship with her. However, geolocation data proved this was false. He had, in fact, gone to Saga's apartment. Detectives initially withheld details about Saga's death during the interrogation to observe his reaction. Amin's demeanor was oddly calm, even light-hearted, as he joked with the officers. When they mentioned Saga's apartment address, he showed no reaction and acted as if he didn't recognize her. When informed that he was the main suspect, Amin became defensive. He insisted he had an alibi, claiming he was driving with a friend at the time of the murder. However, the friend, who had been talking to others on the phone, refused to support Amin's story. This rendered his alibi unreliable. Amin's narrative also became inconsistent. Initially, he claimed he hadn't seen Saga since the evening of December 27th. However, when questioned further, he admitted to visiting her apartment to discuss their relationship and her insistence that he tell his parents about her and the baby. Saga had also urged Amin to move in with her so they could start a family. Yet detectives confirmed that Amin had never spent a night at her new apartment, avoiding it out of fear his family might find out. Despite promising Saga he would move in, Amin repeatedly made excuses to delay. His inconsistent statements, contradictory actions, and suspicious behavior led investigators to arrest him. He was taken into custody while authorities continued to clarify the circumstances of Saga's death. Amin was held in custody for several months as the investigation progressed. Eventually, the prosecution gathered enough convincing evidence to secure a strong case against him. Assuming the evidence, specially trained dogs were used to identify and confirm traces linking Amin to the crime scene. While the defense argued that dogs were not a reliable source of evidence, this was only one piece of the broader case. The most compelling evidence came from DNA analysis. The results confirmed Amin's direct involvement in Saga's murder. Detectives demonstrated that he had strangled her using a lamp cord while she was asleep on the sofa. However, Amin's actions didn't stop there. According to investigators, after strangling Saga, he dragged her to the floor and attempted to use a 30 kilograms table to harm her further. It appeared he intended to tip the table onto her stomach to end the pregnancy. Despite being injured in the struggle, Saga managed to protect her unborn child. Frustrated, Amin then placed the tabletop edge on Saga's throat, pinning her down. Unable to resist further, Saga suffocated under the weight of the table. The heavy object left a visible mark on her neck, corroborating the sequence of events reconstructed by forensic experts. After the murder, Amin staged the scene to resemble a robbery. Drawers were emptied and several household items were scattered. However, detectives found missing items in Amin's possession during subsequent searches. He claimed these were his belongings or gifts from friends, but the explanation didn't hold up under scrutiny. Additional evidence included traces of Amin's DNA under Saga's nails, indicating a struggle. Furthermore, forensic analysis revealed that Saga had engaged in sexual intercourse shortly before her death, which pointed to Amin as the likely partner. The prosecution argued that the staged robbery, along with Amin's attempt to cover his tracks, worsened the severity of his actions. Meanwhile, the defense's claims of a random robbery were undermined by the overwhelming evidence against him, further solidifying the case for the prosecution. Amin insisted that his physical intimacy with Saga had occurred by mutual consent and days before her death. However, the prosecution doubted his claims, given his history of deception throughout the investigation. Evidence from the crime scene and contradictory statements further undermined his credibility. One of the key pieces of evidence was the extensive presence of Amin's DNA in Saga's apartment, contradicting his initial claims that he had never been to her new address. Investigators also corroborated the testimony of Diana, who had warned Saga about Amin's attempts to harm her. Diana's statements were bolstered by alarming search history records on Amin's devices, including searches about whether a kick to a pregnant woman's stomach could harm an unborn child. This painted a clear picture of premeditation. The prosecution presented months of correspondence between Saga and Amin, highlighting their escalating discord since November 2022, primarily over her pregnancy. Saga's persistence in encouraging Amin to acknowledge their relationship to his family, as seen in their final conversations on April 28, placed mounting pressure on him. Amin's defenders argued that this pressure contributed to his mental state, but it did not absolve him of the heinous crime. The prosecution maintained that, instead of confessing to his family, Amin went to Saga's apartment, intending to confront her. The confrontation escalated into violence, driven by his fear of his parents' reaction and unwillingness to commit to a future with Saga and their child. The brutal manner in which he murdered her reflected cold-blooded premeditation. The defense attempted to argue that the DNA under Saga's nails could have been from earlier interactions, as the two were in a relationship. However, Saga's mother, Melissa, refuted this claim, pointing out her daughter's obsessive cleanliness, particularly during pregnancy. Melissa testified that Saga habitually showered shortly before bed and would never have gone unwashed for an extended period, making it highly improbable for old DNA to remain under her nails. The combination of Amin's lies, his incriminating search history, the confirmed testimony of Diana, and the forensic evidence ultimately painted a damning portrait of guilt, leaving little room for doubt about his involvement in the murder of Saga and their unborn child. From the evidence gathered, it became increasingly clear to detectives that Amin had carefully orchestrated his actions around the time of Saga's death. Forensic analysis confirmed that all DNA traces left on her body and belongings were fresh, having been deposited during the violent confrontation. This contradicted Amin's claims and further implicated him in the crime. Additionally, Amin's behavior after the murder raised significant suspicion. He immediately deleted Saga from his Snapchat and other social media accounts, erasing recent correspondence. Detectives easily recovered the deleted data, which added to the growing body of evidence against him. This attempt to sever ties and conceal his connection with Saga and the crime spoke volumes about his guilt. Geolocation records placed Amin near Saga's apartment building at around 8 p.m. on the night of the murder. He stayed in the vicinity, sending messages, but not approaching or leaving, as if hesitating or waiting for the right moment. This period of inactivity suggested that he was mentally preparing himself for the attack or waiting for Saga to fall asleep. Between midnight and 2 a.m., the estimated time of the murder, Amin's phone activity abruptly ceased. Forensic evidence later revealed that this was the same time frame during which Saga and her unborn child were killed. During this period, Amin's phone was set to airplane mode, effectively silencing all incoming calls and messages. His friend Samir tried to contact him multiple times, but the calls were ignored. Cell tower records confirmed that Amin's phone was in the same residential complex where Saga lived, further contradicting his claim that he was at home with his parents during those hours. Amin's phone became active again at 2:16 a.m., coinciding with the conclusion of forensic experts regarding the time of Saga's death. This precise alignment further reinforced the timeline of events and Amin's involvement. Despite this mounting evidence, Amin's version of events continued to shift, further eroding his credibility. At one point, he admitted to being near Saga's apartment but denied entering it. At another, he claimed he had not seen her in days. Detectives and prosecutors used this web of lies, alongside forensic and digital evidence, to build a strong case against Amin. His inconsistent statements, coupled with the undeniable physical evidence, pointed to a calculated and deliberate act of murder. The defense's efforts to paint Amin as a devoted and conflicted partner were undermined by the growing mountain of evidence against him. During the trial, it was revealed that throughout his 2-year relationship with Saga, Amin had been unfaithful multiple times, engaging in intimate encounters with other women. This not only contradicted his claims of love and loyalty, but also cast significant doubt on his character and integrity. The prosecution leveraged these details to dismantle the image Amin's lawyer attempted to construct. Amin's fabricated story about a gang of robbers further eroded his credibility. His claim that a bag of money stored in Saga's apartment had motivated the alleged robbery was unsupported by any evidence. Investigators found no signs of forced entry at Saga's residence, and the lack of any significant cash sum reinforced the notion that Amin's story was a desperate attempt to deflect blame. The prosecution argued that the only plausible explanation was that Amin had been let into the apartment by Saga or used a key he possessed, an assertion consistent with the evidence. Despite spending 9 months in custody, Amin never confessed to the crime, maintaining his innocence throughout the investigation and trial. He admitted that he feared his family's reaction to his relationship with Saga, particularly the pregnancy, due to the stark cultural and religious differences between them. Amin's admission highlighted the pressure he felt, but it also underscored the prosecution's argument that this pressure could have driven him to commit the murder. The jury deliberated the evidence and arguments for several days, ultimately reaching a unanimous verdict on November 9, 2024. Magid Amin Ibrahim was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Saga and her unborn child. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, a punishment reflective of the gravity of his crime. Despite the conviction, Amin continued to insist on his innocence, claiming that he had loved Saga and their unborn child, and that he had no intention of harming them. However, his actions, coupled with the overwhelming evidence, painted a different picture. A young man who, consumed by fear of familial dishonor and societal judgment, committed a heinous act that ended 2 innocent lives. The case served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of cultural and familial pressures when combined with personal insecurities and a lack of accountability. Saga's family, while devastated by her loss, expressed hope that justice had been served and that her story would inspire others to prioritize love and respect over prejudice and fear. The defense, continuing to insist that Amin was not guilty, maintained the argument that Saga had become the victim of a random robbery. They asserted that they would appeal the verdict, seeking to secure Amin's freedom. The appeal was filed immediately following the court's decision, though the outcome of this legal struggle remained uncertain. Despite the conviction for the murder of Saga, no charges were filed for the death of her unborn child, which sparked outrage within Saga's family. They felt that the child's death had been completely disregarded, overshadowed by the focus on Saga's tragic end. The case quickly gained widespread attention from both the media and the public, igniting intense discussions about migrants, particularly those from Muslim sojourning countries arriving in Sweden. With an increasing number of migrants seeking asylum and a growing debate over integration, the murder became emblematic of the tensions surrounding cultural assimilation and the challenges posed by differing worldviews. Critics of the migrant influx pointed to the brutality of the crime as evidence of the difficulties migrants face in adapting to European societal norms, especially when entrenched religious and cultural beliefs come into conflict with the values of the host country. Some members of the public, however, voiced support for Amin, maintaining that the young man had never shown a tendency toward cruelty. His family continued to advocate for his innocence, convinced of his good character. They argued that Amin's actions were driven by an overwhelming fear of his conservative family's rejection, rather than any malice towards Saga or their unborn child. Despite this defense, the evidence against him remained irrefutable, leading to his conviction for the murder of both Saga and her child. Saga's family, devastated by the loss of their daughter and grandchild, found little comfort in the ongoing legal battle. They felt that the justice system had failed to address the full scope of the tragedy, especially regarding the loss of the unborn child. Nonetheless, the case had forced Sweden to confront difficult conversations about cultural clashes and the potential dangers of uncompromising traditionalism when juxtaposed with modern European values. Story 3. We're diving into a chilling case that proves the saying no case doesn't always hold true. This principle, rooted in English law, gained fame after the miracle of Campden. But in our story, there's nobody yet there's still a case. On a November morning in 2011, Galina Kanaya returned to her rented apartment on Yubova Street in Vladivostok and vanished without a trace. 3 years later, her boyfriend, Victor Cohen, was convicted of her murder. However, no physical evidence of Galina's death was ever presented in court. Her parents remain convinced she is alive and continue to hope for her return. In April 2024, Victor Cohen was released from prison, reigniting public interest in the case. The controversy has split opinions. Some believe Victor served time for a crime that never happened, while others argue the sentence for murder was far too lenient. Let's explore how this high-profile disappearance and alleged murder unfolded, dividing the nation and inspiring search efforts for Galina. Victor Cohen was born on July 9, 1988, in Vladivostok. He adopted the surname Cohen in 2012. His parents divorced when he was young, leaving his mother and grandmother to raise him. In 2005, he graduated from the Far Eastern State University's high school gymnasium. He enrolled in the university's Institute of Mass Communications to study public relations, but dropped out after 6 months. In 2007, Elena Katinskaya introduced Victor to her sister, Galina, who was 3.5 years older than him. Galina was born on April 22, 1985, in Rostov-on-Don. At age 13, her family moved to Vladivostok. Galina was known for her striking appearance, unique sense of style, and artistic nature. She studied at an art school and later joined the Faculty of Design at the Far Eastern Federal University. Victor fell deeply in love with Galina, and together they dreamed of pursuing theater careers. Victor dropped out of school, and the couple moved to Moscow to chase their dreams. Unfortunately, Galina failed her entrance exams, and although Victor succeeded, he returned to Vladivostok with her out of solidarity. Back home, they started living together, and Victor received news of his grandfather's death. With the inheritance Victor received after his grandfather's death, he and Galina rented an apartment in the city center, bought themselves cars, and decided to invest the remaining money into a business. They tried several ventures producing car tires, opening a chain of donut shops, and even reselling Churchilla traditional Georgian sweets. However, all these projects quickly failed, leaving the couple disheartened. Over time, the strain of financial failure began to take a toll on their relationship. Their disagreements turned into heated arguments, and at times, violence. On one occasion, Galina's friends witnessed Victor lifting her by the neck during a fight. However, Galina wasn't always the victim. She sometimes hit Victor or broke furniture in their rented apartment during arguments. Their relationship deteriorated further. Galina began frequenting nightclubs, while Victor sought attention from other women, both seemingly trying to escape the problems in their lives. On the morning of November 14, 2011, after another night out at the club, Galina returned home in high spirits. However, Victor wasn't there, which made her furious. At 6:43 a.m., she called him, demanding he return immediately. Within 15 minutes, Victor was back at their apartment. A heated argument followed, during which they decided to end their relationship for good. Galina demanded 300,000 rubles in exchange for the car Victor had previously given her. Victor handed over the money, and Galina left the apartment, supposedly for the last time. The following day, Galina's parents grew concerned when they couldn't reach her. Her phone was switched off. Victor also didn't respond to their calls. 2 days later, he contacted Galina's mother, explaining that the two had quarreled. He claimed she had taken a large sum of money and left, saying, "You'll never see me again. Don't look for me. Tell my mom everything is fine with me." Victor added that he had tried calling Galina several times after she left, but her phone remained off. Initially, her sudden disappearance didn't alarm her friends and family, as Galina was known for her impulsive behavior. However, as days passed without any sign of her, their worry grew. Initially, Galina's disappearance didn't raise alarms because she was known for her impulsive nature and had disappeared for days before. However, 3 days later, her father filed a missing person report, prompting law enforcement to begin an official search. Police immediately questioned Victor, as he was the last person to see Galina. During his interrogation, Victor admitted that his relationship with Galina had deteriorated and that he was seeing another woman. He described Galina as volatile and jealous, claiming she had physically attacked him in the past and once poured yogurt on his car in a fit of rage. Victor insisted on his innocence, saying, "I didn't kill Galina. Yes, we quarreled. She packed her belongings, took 300,000 rubles and left. I don't know where she went." Investigators searched the apartment the couple shared, as well as both of their cars, but found no blood or any evidence of foul play. Victor even agreed to take a lie detector test. While his testimony was inconsistent at times, there was no concrete proof linking him to Galina's disappearance. Police also interviewed Galina's friends and neighbors but found no signs of a crime. Adding to the mystery, Galina had never traveled outside of Vladivostok and didn't possess a foreign passport. With no evidence of wrongdoing, the authorities decided not to pursue a criminal case. Victor, meanwhile, moved on with his life. He collected Galina's belongings and returned them to her parents. Shortly afterward, he moved in with his new girlfriend, Tatiana. Their relationship blossomed, and in 2012 they got married. It was during this time that Victor decided to change his last name. Encouraged by Tatiana, who had heard the name in a movie, he adopted the surname Cohen, leaving behind his father's surname, which he had long disliked. For several years, Galina's disappearance faded from public memory. Victor and Tatiana enjoyed a happy marriage, filled with travel and quiet moments together. But everything changed 3 years later, when Galina's disappearance was reclassified as a murder case. For 3 years, Galina remained missing, and her mother, Elena Katinskaya, didn't initially worry much. Elena believed her daughter's creative and unpredictable nature meant she might have simply left on a whim. This lack of urgency likely contributed to the delay in classifying Galina's disappearance as a criminal case. In June 2014, however, the authorities revisited the case. Based on existing evidence, they reclassified it as a murder investigation under the relevant criminal code. Galina was officially listed as a missing person, and detectives began exploring multiple theories about her disappearance. These ranged from her leaving to work in the modeling industry abroad to the possibility of foul play. As investigators delved into the murder theory, Victor Cohen, Galina's ex-boyfriend, came under scrutiny. They uncovered reports of frequent quarrels between the two, often fueled by Galina's jealousy over Victor's relationships with other women. Additionally, there were claims that Galina had plans to travel to Korea. She had previously worked as a model in China and was rumored to want to continue her career in modeling. However, Victor became the primary suspect because he was the last person to see Galina alive. Discrepancies in Victor's and other witnesses' testimonies further raised suspicions about his potential involvement. On July 23, 2014, Victor was summoned for questioning. During this session, he shocked investigators by confessing to killing Galina. Victor admitted that during an argument on the morning of November 14, 2011, he strangled Galina. He then dismembered her body in the bathroom, placed the remains into 3 plastic buckets, and transported them to a wooded area near the Varig factory. There, he built a fire using car tires, burned the body, and scattered the ashes in various locations. Victor displayed an unsettling level of confidence during the interrogation. He spoke casually with investigators, used foul language, and even smiled as he recounted the gruesome details. Sitting comfortably with his feet on the floor, he behaved as though the entire ordeal was a routine conversation. He shared chilling details, including how he had initially planned to boil Galina's body in a steamer, grind the remains with a meat grinder, and flush them down the toilet. However, he abandoned this idea, fearing the sewer system might clog and incriminate him. Victor coldly explained that he killed Galina because she was interfering with his new relationship. This shocking confession left even seasoned detectives stunned by Victor's lack of remorse and the sheer brutality of his actions. Victor described Galina as an unconventional woman who thrived on attention. She frequently went out to nightclubs and had a fiery temper, often causing loud arguments at home. According to Victor, Galina sometimes spoke of wanting the glamorous life of an escort model. However, she refused to accept that such a lifestyle often required providing intimate services. Despite her eccentric behavior, Victor found her charming and until things took a darker turn. From Victor Cohen's interrogation. I was irritated. I was standing near the coffee machine, drinking coffee, and something in me just snapped. That was it. I went home, walked up to her while she was sleeping, said, "I'm sorry," and started choking her. She woke up and tried to fight back. But I strangled her for a long time. Then I left the house and cried. It wasn't fear. It was frustration and loss. I understood what I had done. But as a rational person, I kept my composure. Following the confession, investigators brought Victor to the apartment he shared with Galina in 2011 to conduct an investigative experiment. There, Victor demonstrated how he strangled Galina on a folding sofa. He claimed she had been drunk and asleep, making it easy for him to overpower her. After ensuring she was dead, Victor said he left the apartment, went to his car, and devised a calculated plan to dispose of her body. Victor explained that he had learned about burning bodies using car tires from a documentary about India, where the practice was used in traditional cremation rituals to achieve higher temperatures. He told investigators that disposing of Galina's body was much simpler than he had initially imagined. Late that night, Victor was taken to the vacant lot, where he claimed to have burned Galina's remains. Under pitch darkness, he was asked to the exact location. However, according to human rights activists, the chosen location had no traffic or CCTV cameras, raising suspicions about the integrity of the investigation. Key gaps in the case emerged during the investigation. Victor repeatedly pointed out inconsistencies himself. It wasn't clear what tool he used to dismember Galina's body, as an ordinary kitchen knife wouldn't suffice. Questions arose about how he fit her remains into 3 buckets, carried them out in full view, and why no one noticed him leaving with such unusual items. The landlord who rented the apartment to Galina was later brought in for questioning, as investigators tried to piece together the missing details. When investigators questioned the landlords who rented the apartment to Galina and Victor, they revealed that they had lost contact with Victor after learning the police had been there. When they went to check, they found the apartment completely empty. No tenants or belongings remained. On the ceiling, they noticed brown splatters they assumed were from coffee or tea, and there were black streaks on the wallpaper, likely from storing car tires. Unknown to Victor, his interrogation had been recorded on video. When he realized he had revealed too much on camera, he retracted his confession. Victor claimed that during his questioning at the investigation unit on Kariva Street, officers had forced him to confess through unauthorized methods. He also alleged they threatened to harm his wife, Tatiana, if he did not comply. Victor stated that the story he told was fabricated under duress by the officers, and that the location of the alleged burning of Galina's remains had been deduced using his phone records. However, questions about his claims of torture arose. CCTV footage from the investigation unit showed that Tatiana Cohen arrived at the building around 6 p.m., but was not allowed inside. She waited outside until 6:20 p.m., at which point Victor was brought in. Tatiana entered the building at 6:30 p.m., and Victor's recorded interrogation began at 6:38 p.m. Critics questioned how torture could occur in just 8 minutes, leading Victor to make up such a detailed and graphic confession. On August 11, 2015, after the first court hearing, Victor Cohen was found guilty of the murder of Galina Katinskaya. The court sentenced him to 9 years and 10 months of imprisonment in a strict regime penal colony. After Victor's conviction, his wife, Tatiana, became his staunchest supporter and primary defender. Convinced of his innocence, she tirelessly fought to clear his name. The case captured the attention of Vladivostok residents, dividing the public into 2 camps: those who believed Victor was wrongfully convicted and those who saw him as a cold-blooded killer. Supporters even organized rallies in Victor's defense, while his wife remained unwavering in her fight for justice. Even after the devastating news that her husband would spend nearly 10 years in prison, Tatiana remained steadfast in her belief in Victor's innocence. During the court proceedings, a revealing video included in the case files was shown. Victor claimed his confessions were coerced through threats and physical abuse by interrogators, citing hospital records that documented a concussion and ear trauma as evidence. The case gained widespread attention. The idea that a young, charming man with striking brown eyes could coldly strangle dismember, and burn his girlfriend shocked the public. Many struggled to reconcile these accusations with Victor's charismatic persona and his background. He had even been admitted to the prestigious Moscow Theater Institute but chose not to pursue it. Friends, classmates, and acquaintances universally described Victor as a positive, well-mannered individual. Victor's defense focused on the lack of concrete evidence. Neither the apartment where the murder allegedly occurred nor the site where the body was reportedly burned yielded any traces of human DNA. Witnesses even claimed to have seen Galina in the city after her disappearance. The case's emotional intensity was further amplified by Galina's mother, Elena Kadinskaya. She genuinely believed her daughter was alive and consistently stated in interviews that Victor was innocent. She held onto the hope that Galina would eventually return and explain her absence. After being convicted, Victor continued to claim that the narrative of the murder was entirely fabricated. He pointed out the absence of biological traces at the alleged burning site as well as inconclusive forensic results from his apartment and car. Galina's parents, surprisingly, supported Victor, remaining convinced that their daughter was still alive. Victor's lawyer, Ivan Mikhayev, also emphasized the lack of objective evidence. Soil samples from the site where Victor allegedly burned the body showed no biological remains. Furthermore, critical case materials were reportedly missing, including inspection reports from the apartment and car, lie detector results, and camera footage from 2011. Victor's family and defense team suggested the case had been hastily reclassified as a murder to avoid accountability for an unsolved disappearance. Despite the conviction, questions lingered about the integrity of the investigation, leaving the public divided over Victor's guilt and Galina's fate. Galina Kadinskaya was never found, but the case against Victor Cohen proceeded despite the absence of a body. Victor, disagreeing with the verdict, filed an appeal, maintaining his innocence and insisting that his confession had been coerced by law enforcement. Tatyana Cohen, Victor's wife at the time, launched a massive campaign in his defense. She appeared on various talk shows, organized rallies, and maintained an active presence on social media, where she raised funds for legal fees while posting what many believed to be fabricated updates. On December 7, 2015, the Court of Appeals overturned Victor's conviction, citing violations of the Code of Criminal Procedure. The case was sent back to the Court of First Instance for retrial. Despite this, on June 21, 2016, the court again found Victor guilty of murdering Galina. He was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months in a strict regime penal colony. Victor's defense team appealed the ruling once more, but on November 28, 2016, the Court of Appeals upheld the sentence and Victor began serving his time. Following the final ruling, Tatyana distanced herself from Victor, withdrew from the campaign, and filed for divorce. It was later revealed that she had entered a new relationship almost immediately after Victor's arrest. This unexpected development led to speculation about her true motives, but Tatyana refused to comment. Despite the lack of a body, the court convicted Victor based on circumstantial evidence, which prosecutors argued was overwhelming. Among the key pieces of evidence was his confession, in which he described a plan to dispose of Galina's body using a meat grinder. Investigators later uncovered corroborating records from November 14, 2011. According to these records, Victor purchased a meat grinder and a pressure cooker from the Dominica store at the Maxim shopping center. In 2015, the investigation retrieved receipts and matched them with Victor's phone records. A purchase under the surname Puv matched the exact time of the billing. The store's administrator testified in court, confirming the authenticity of the database and that there had been no tampering. This evidence, combined with Victor's initial confession and his inconsistent testimony, led to his conviction. Though Victor and his defense continued to contest the fairness of the trial, public opinion remained divided, with many questioning the justice of convicting someone in the absence of direct forensic evidence. The court's decision to convict Victor Cohen heavily relied on circumstantial evidence, as the body of Galina Kadinskaya was never recovered. Key factors in the verdict included discrepancies in Victor's statements and corroborative details from various sources. Cell phone billings and behavior. Victor's cell phone records from November 14, 2011, showed that he stayed at the apartment from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., This time frame coincided with the alleged dismemberment of Galina's body. Later that night, his phone connected to a tower near the Varig plant, where he reportedly disposed of her remains. Victor had previously claimed that he tried to call Galina after she left, but phone records indicated otherwise. Between 10 a.m. and the evening, he made no attempts to contact her. His last call that day was at 11:51 p.m. to Tatiana, made near the plant. What stood out to investigators in the court was Victor's lack of effort to contact Galina after her disappearance. Unlike her relatives, friends, and even Victor's own mother, who repeatedly tried calling her, Victor made no such attempts. Prosecutors argued that this behavior suggested Victor already knew she would not answer. Victor reportedly purchased 3 20-liter plastic buckets with lids on the same day he bought a meat grinder and pressure cooker. While the receipts for these buckets did not contain a name, investigators linked them to Victor. Questions arose about how Galina's body could have fit into 3 20-liter buckets. Prosecutors argued that Victor meticulously dismembered her in the bathtub to make this possible. Further evidence came from the bathtub itself. According to Victor's confession, he dismembered Galina there, covering the area with foil to prevent blood from leaving traces. He then scrubbed the tub vigorously with a metal brush, damaging the enamel. Later, Victor claimed that the damaged enamel was the result of Galina using harsh cleaning chemicals. Witness testimonies. Witnesses claimed to have seen Galina in a supermarket in Vladivostok and at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow after her disappearance. However, these claims were debunked during the investigation. CCTV footage from the airport revealed no evidence of Galina's presence, and the alleged supermarket sighting was also proven false. One witness, who falsely testified to seeing Galina, was later charged with providing false evidence. Final judgment. The combination of Victor's inconsistent statements, the phone billing records, the detailed confession later recanted, the purchases tied to the timeline of events, and the damage to the apartment's bathtub formed a compelling narrative for the prosecution. While the defense continued to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, and that no physical traces of Galina were ever found, the court upheld its decision. Victor Cohen was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months in a strict regime penal colony. Despite ongoing debate, Victor's conviction remains one of the more controversial cases, as it hinges on circumstantial evidence without the recovery of the victim's body. The mystery surrounding Galina Caden's disappearance and the subsequent conviction of Victor Cohen has left many unresolved questions. One of the main issues discussed by investigators and journalists is why no physical traces of Galina were found, despite the brutal nature of the crime. The lack of traces. The key question that loomed over the investigation was why. After committing such a gruesome crime, there were no physical traces of Galina's body or DNA in Victor's apartment or cars. The answer became clearer when examining the timeline and the way the crime scene was handled. Delay in police access after Galina's disappearance. Victor made sure that the police couldn't access his apartment for a critical period. He immediately moved in with his wife, Tatiana, and the apartment remained off-limits to the police until December 8th, nearly a month after the murder. Even then, the police didn't use sensitive techniques, such as luminol, which could reveal traces of blood, to investigate the apartment for forensic evidence. By the time they gained access, Victor had had 3 weeks to clean the apartment thoroughly. Car inspection similarly. The police didn't inspect Victor's car until December 27th, more than a month after Galina's disappearance. This delay gave him ample time to clean the car and eliminate any traces of her presence. Burning the body expert analysis concluded that it was indeed possible to completely burn a body under artisanal conditions, such as using car tires to reach the high temperatures required to burn bones. This process destroyed much of Galina's remains, leaving only small, blackened fragments of bone. Victor claimed he scattered these remains in the woods near the place of the fire, but wild animals may have further scattered them, making it nearly impossible for investigators to recover any physical evidence. Scattering evidenced the fact that no bones or remains were found in the area Victor described was significant. The only way to locate these remnants would have been to sift through a vast area of forest. The sheer scale of the search made it an almost impossible task, further complicating the investigation. Theories and doubts. Victor Cohen's conviction for Galena Caden, Skyer's murder remains controversial, as questions linger about her fate. Investigators argue it's nearly impossible for someone to vanish completely in today's world without leaving a trace. Yet, more than 13 years later, no evidence has surfaced of Galena being alive or of her remains being found. Victor never suggested Galena might return, focusing instead on denying his guilt. Unanswered questions. The case lacks definitive evidence, such as DNA or a body, leaving uncertainty about Victor's guilt and what truly happened to Galena. His passive acceptance of his conviction and lack of efforts to prove his innocence have raised doubts. Lack of closure. Galena's family continues to search for her, clinging to hope despite the years gone by. The absence of answers keeps the case alive in the public's mind, with many still skeptical of the official story. Legacy of mystery. The disappearance of Galena Caden Skyer is a haunting reminder of how elusive the truth can be. Victor's behavior, coupled with the unresolved case, ensures the mystery continues to stir emotions and speculation. Story 4. Imagine a cold, dimly lit basement in a quiet Czech town, where the air smells of decay and the walls seem to press in with a weight that feels almost alive. In the flickering shadows, two small figures crouch inside crude cages. Children, though their thin, battered bodies make them barely recognizable. They are covered in bruises and wounds, evidence of months of unimaginable suffering. This was not a scene from a horror film. It was a cruel reality that police uncovered in 2007, one of the most horrifying cases of child abuse in recent history. At the center of it were two sisters, Klara and Katerina Morova, whose lives would take a dark and tragic turn no one could have foreseen. Klara was the eldest daughter in a seemingly normal family. Born in 1975, she grew up with her sister in Kazim, a small, peaceful village about 120 miles from Prague. It was a quiet, picturesque place where life moved at an easy pace, with good schools and a strong sense of community. The kind of town where things like this shouldn't happen. Little is known about the early years, but one thing was clear. Something wasn't right with Klara from a young age. She was a pretty child, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, but beneath her innocent appearance, her mind was beginning to unravel. Early signs of schizophrenia started to surface. Schizophrenia is a brutal disorder, twisting a person's perception of reality, causing them to see and believe things that aren't there. For Klara, these delusions took on a religious form, filling her head with strange fantasies of divine purpose. No official diagnosis was ever made, but those around Klara noticed the change. Over time, her younger sister Katerina, like many siblings, began to mimic her. Unfortunately, what she copied was not just her sister's behavior, but her increasingly unstable mental state. Together, they fell deeper into their shared world of religious delusions. They convinced themselves that they were chosen for some higher purpose, feeding off each other's fantasies until their grip on reality was barely there. Despite their growing madness, Klara managed to live a seemingly ordinary life. She finished school, went to university to study pedagogy, and even found love with a man who accepted her, flaws and all. They married, and for a brief time it seemed like things were looking up. When their first child, Jacob, was born, it was a moment of hope, a sign that Klara might escape the darkness in her mind and build a life full of love and normalcy. But the darkness was never far behind, and soon it would consume everything. Nearly 2 years after the birth of her first child, Klara was pregnant again, and soon welcomed her second son, Andre. But while the family grew, so did the cracks in her relationship with her husband. As time passed, Klara's erratic behavior, her mood swings and even bouts of aggression, became too much for her husband to handle. Eventually, it all reached a breaking point, and he left, abandoning Klara with their 2 young boys. Despite the heartbreak, Klara did her best to keep life moving forward for her children. She was dedicated to their studies, encouraging their involvement in activities like summer camps, school events, and family vacations. Outwardly, she was still fulfilling her role as a mother, but inside, the loneliness and resentment weighed heavily on her, dragging her deeper into depression. In her isolation, Clara turned to the one person she trusted, her younger sister, Katerina. Hoping that her sister's presence might ease her emotional burden, Clara invited Katerina to move in with her and the boys. It was during this time that a new figure entered their lives. A girl named Anichka who claimed to be just 12 years old. Some reports say Clara met Anichka at university, where the girl told her she had run away from a youth care center after suffering mistreatment. Others suggest that Katerina, who worked at a local youth institution, encountered Anichka, who said she had escaped from a human trafficking ring. There were many stories about how Anichka came into their lives, but all led to the same unsettling truth. This child was no ordinary girl. The Morova sisters, driven by their own delusions and religious fervor, welcomed Anichka into their home with open arms. To them, she seemed like a gift, an innocent, vulnerable girl who needed protection. But Anichka was hiding an extraordinary secret. She wasn't a helpless child at all. In reality, she was a 32-year-old woman named Barbara Shkrylova. Barbara suffered from a condition that made her appear much younger than she was. With her childlike face and small stature, she had perfected the art of deception, manipulating those around her into believing she was a vulnerable young girl. She exploited this to gain sympathy and secure a place in the homes of people who were moved by her tragic backstory. There are reports of one family who took her in, convinced they were adopting a young girl in need. However, Barbara's violent and unpredictable behavior soon surfaced, and the family discovered the shocking truth about her real age, leading to her return to the state's child welfare system. Barbara's history was filled with stints in psychiatric institutions, from which she often managed to escape. But none of this was known to Clara and Katerina. To them, Anichka was a helpless child in need of love and care. They quickly grew attached to her, and before long, they made the fateful decision to adopt her. A decision that would lead directly to disaster. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly with the addition of the so-called child to the family. But it wasn't long before Barbara began to feel envious of the loving attention Clara's biological children received. She started causing trouble, engaging in mischievous behavior and creating disruptions, for which she then blamed the two young boys, ages 10 and 8. The boys, in turn, were unfairly reprimanded, often without reason. These increasingly tense situations undoubtedly worsened the fragile mental state of the Morova sisters. It appears that Barbara's skillful manipulation gave her control over the sisters, allowing her to slowly influence their decisions. Around this time, Barbara began discussing the religion she followed, called the Grail movement. Research into this group shows it to be an apocalyptic religious organization that believes in a coming transformation of society. Followers, organized into small groups known as circles, interpret the teachings in their own way, guided by the idea that good deeds on earth will ensure a place in heaven. However, it seems that within some circles, these good deeds were believed to absolve members of any wrongs they may have committed. Barbara belonged to one of these circles and soon convinced Clara and Katerina to join her. According to various accounts, this particular group was involved in troubling practices, including violence, exploitation, and other morally questionable acts. At the center of this group was a mysterious figure known as the Doctor, who communicated with his followers through text messages, issuing instructions that were often beyond comprehension. One of the first deeply concerning actions, which went largely unnoticed, was when Clara withdrew her son Andrei from school, claiming he had become deaf and mute and that she would be homeschooling him. This marked the beginning of a descent into something far darker for the family. From that moment on, any wrongdoings, whether genuine or made up by Barbara, led to Jacob and Andrei experiencing severe punishments. They were hit with disproportionate force for their transgressions, whether real or imagined, using objects as hard as spoons or belts, and even worse, being locked in small, dark rooms at night, exploiting Barbara's control over the siblings. In a more extreme approach, Barbara suggested locking the disobedient children permanently to a local blacksmith to set an example and curb their continued misconduct. The blacksmith was tasked with constructing a cage, unaware of what its purpose would be once completed. This iron cage was then installed in the house's basement, where the children were confined over several months. Clara's sons endured a nightmare filled with cruelty, following the physician's orders received via text messages. They faced torture, including being pinched repeatedly, tied up, whipped, and deprived of food for days. Being trapped in the cage, they were unable to escape, forcing them to use makeshift toilets and sleep on the dirty ground. Every week, pretending to clean up the odor, the women would drench the children and the basement with cold water. However, their suffering did not end there. At one point, the boys were taken to cabins hidden deep in the forest and locked in smaller cages. During this period, more members of the Grail movement assembled and subjected the boys to a week of brutal abuse. They were submerged in buckets of water, suffocated with plastic bags until nearly unconscious, beaten, forced into battles with each other, and made to dig what they believed were graves. Cigarettes were burned into their flesh. They were often bound by their hands and feet, their mouths sealed with tape and subjected to sexual abuse. Upon their return to their prison, located in the basement of their family residence, the circumstances took a turn for the worse. Barbara came up with a strategy to overfeed the boys while they were confined, aiming to make them gain weight. One day, the three women went down to the basement, and Clara asked her younger son to stretch his leg through the bars of the cage. The frightened child complied, and as soon as his leg was within reach, Katerina and Barbara seized it, while Clara swiftly made a cut, dividing the flesh among them, which led to hysterical laughter. This nightmare-worthy scenario persisted for roughly 6 months, from December 2006 to June 2007. During this time, Barbara came up with another ingenious plan to monitor the children. They bought baby monitoring cameras and installed one in the basement, allowing them to not only oversee the children's every move, but also witness their suffering whenever one of the women would go down to torment them while the others were busy with household tasks. Little did they know, this clever plan would ultimately lead to their downfall, in a way that seemed almost miraculous. On May 10, 2007, a neighbor of the Mawarava sisters was installing a baby monitor in his house to keep an eye on his newborn while he slept. After setting up the camera, he turned it on to ensure everything was functioning properly. To his shock, instead of seeing his baby's crib, the screen displayed a dark area where a small child, with his arms tied behind him, was struggling to eat food from the floor with his mouth. At another moment, the screen showed an adult woman's hand holding something, while the child desperately tried to consume it. The image was so disturbing that the neighbor was horrified and immediately called the police to report the appalling scene. Moments later, officers arrived at his home and were met with the horrifying images. The advanced range of their equipment made it clear that the source of this terror was very close. Determined to put an end to the nightmare as swiftly as possible, the officers began to knock on the doors of nearby homes. The initial few residents had no issue allowing the access to every room until they reached the house where the Mawarava sisters lived. Initially, the sisters were hesitant to let the police in, but eventually relented. During the inspection, the police discovered a small door hidden under the staircase. To their shock, what they found was beyond what anyone could imagine. Stepping inside, they were overwhelmed by a terrible stench that filled the entire space. The first sight was of a terrified girl clutching a teddy bear, running directly towards the officers, screaming in fear that she and her brothers had been abused by their adoptive mother and aunt. One officer took the girl outside, while the others were left in disbelief at the sight of 2 nearly naked boys, their bodies covered in wounds, locked inside cages as if they were animals. One of the boys appeared unconscious. Without hesitation, the boys were immediately freed and attended to by emergency services. They quickly provided first aid and rushed them to the hospital for further treatment. The girl, who didn't seem to have any physical injuries, was taken into custody by the authorities. Clara and Katerina were arrested. Jacob had some wounds that were treated but did not require hospitalization, so both children were sent to a child protection center. However, Andre, the younger boy, was in critical condition when he arrived at the hospital. Upon realizing he had not been returned to the basement, he experienced a panic attack, began to scream that he was seeing ghosts, and begged the doctors to end his suffering. The situation could not have been more tragic. When he calmed down, the doctors could not believe what they saw in the boy. He was covered in scars, bruises, and open wounds, one of which was particularly large on one of his buttocks. He had to remain hospitalized for proper treatment. While healing physical wounds on their body, injury was caused by months of terrible violence with their mother, aunt, and others, so much harder to overcome in the meantime, that research began to reveal the truth about what happened behind closed doors in this house. And at the same time, in the lives of the population were placed in the care center, believed that the young girl refused to work with advisors and professionals who showed aggression and sadness, but she also began to make mistakes that pointed out the truth during the initial assessment of her mental condition. She got paper and crayon to draw what, instead, she wanted a children's drawing. She produced complex geometric shapes and improved mathematical calculations that go beyond what could be expected from 13 years old. Unfortunately, Annika's studies were never completed. A few days after being placed in the center, she escaped through the window without leaving a trace. Security forces immediately began searching for the girl and distributed leaflets with her photograph and information. To surprise, they soon received tips from various sources who claimed that she was recognized in the picture and claimed that she was a 33-year-old woman named Barbara. Seemed to receive help from a known couple who provided her son's documents. In order to leave the country, she initially went to Denmark, and from there to Oslo. In Norway, Barbara again changed her appearance and shaved her head and posed like a 13-year-old boy named Adam. She turned to the authorities and claimed she was on a rant from a malicious father. Several sources say that Adam was occupied by the family and entered a school where he was soon considered a gifted student. This charade continued for several months, but the Czech authorities did not give up and, in cooperation with international colleagues, the pieces of the puzzle were managed together. DNA analysis eventually confirmed the true identity of Barbara, which led to her arrest. After that, she was extradited back to the Czech Republic to face legal proceedings. After her return, Barbara was assessed psychologically in a number of ways. At least one expert who dealt with her reportedly noticed indications of psychotic tendencies. Among the most startling revelations was the rumored fact that a worried instructor was the reason behind Barbara's imprisonment in Norway. Barbara had drawn a picture of 7 bruised and bleeding children, each with a number, and identified herself as the 7th, which had worried the teacher when she was posing as Adam. Hundreds of reporters and television teams crowded the municipal court in the Czech city of Jarn on Friday, May 9, 2008, taking pictures of Katarina and Barbara being led inside. The two ladies were accused of tricking the personnel of a daycare center by pretending that Barbara was Annika, a 13-year-old adopted girl. They were not released even though the court apparently dismissed part of the charges. They were taken into custody right away and accused of major crimes, including child abuse. For other members of the group they belonged to were also included in the charges. Visibly distraught and shrunken, Clara was spotted approaching the courtroom with her sister as the trial got underway. Along with 3 other people, Barbara also made her way into the courtroom. When Clara's turn came to testify, she confessed to abusing her kids over a period of several months. She asserted, nonetheless, that Barbara and her sister Katarina had tricked her. Clara claimed they had put her into a delusional condition, engulfing her in the Grail movement to the extent she was unable to recognize the seriousness of what she was doing. Additionally, Barbara reportedly stated that she had suffered abuse at the hands of the Morova sisters. But the court mostly disregarded her assertions and few people found her credible. Jacob and Andre had the chance to speak with the judge directly, who described the horrifying experiences they went through. They told how the accused violated their privacy, forced them to live in near starvation for months in inhumane conditions, and even cannibalized parts of their bodies. During the hearings, the officers who had entered the House of Horrors also testified. One of the officers described how they saw a youngster lying on the floor, naked, as soon as they entered the basement. He pointed out that the Morova sisters showed no concern for the child's welfare, and the girl identified as Annika even tried to block the officers by clinging to their legs. At the end of the hearings, the prosecutor stated that the motive behind these horrific acts was to force the children into complete submission to the group's religious goals. When sentencing, the judge explained that the ultimate aim of these atrocities was to utterly break the will of the children. He also noted that, although there were signs of cult involvement, there wasn't enough evidence to prove it. In the end, the judge found all 6 accused guilty and handed down their sentences. Clara Morova, the the boy's mother, was sentenced to 9 years in a maximum security prison, while her sister Katerina received a 10-year sentence. The other 3 individuals were convicted of abuse and given 7 years. Barbara, then 34, was found guilty of repeated abuse and cruelty, but received a lighter sentence of only 5 years in prison. The identity of the so-called doctor, believed to be behind the group's actions, was never confirmed. Many were shocked by what seemed like surprisingly light sentences, considering the brutal violence inflicted on 2 innocent children. Moreover, reports revealed that Barbara was released on parole after serving just half of her sentence, meaning she was out after only 2.5 years. Her lawyer argued that her deteriorating mental health played a role in her early release. Meanwhile, Jacob and Andre, with the help of specialists, have managed to overcome much of the trauma, though those events will undoubtedly stay with them forever. Story 5. In 2022, a young man named Bryce Brawl disappeared under strange circumstances, leaving only scattered clues and many unanswered questions. His girlfriend Cordelia's family was puzzled by what had happened, and her father, Michael Ilix, seemed to know more than he let on. What started as a routine missing persons case quickly turned into a chilling tale of lies, revenge, and desperation. What really happened that fateful day? How deep does this mystery run? Stay with us as we uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deceit and suspicion. It was a cold day in a small Minnesota town, with mist blanketing the streets and a damp chill in the air. The usually quiet town of Center felt even more desolate. This was the last place Bryce was seen, leaving home to visit a storage unit with Cordelia's father, Michael. Cordelia had just returned to Minnesota after months of traveling across the country, hoping for a warm welcome and some peace. Instead, she found herself entangled in a series of unsettling events. Shortly after her return, she sensed something was off. Bryce had gone with her father to drop off some belongings at a storage unit, just a short walk from their home. The trip should have only taken 30 minutes, but as the hours passed, Bryce didn't come back. Cordelia's unease grew. She tried to distract herself by settling in and taking a shower, but the anxiety wouldn't fade. Later that day, Michael returned alone. He looked shaken and told Cordelia that Bryce had been taken at the storage facility. Michael explained that 2 dark gray cars had pulled up while they were there. People who seemed like officials got out, but they didn't show any identification or introduce themselves. According to Michael, everything happened so quickly that he couldn't ask questions or figure out what was going on. The strangers restrained Bryce, handcuffed him, and drove off. The cars were plain and unmarked, their headlights cutting through the evening gloom, leaving more questions than answers. The fog clouded Michael's memory, and he couldn't recall any details that might help identify who or what he had seen. His vague words left Cordelia shocked. Desperate for answers, she immediately tried calling Bryce, but his phone was off. She sent him messages, begging him to come back and explain what had happened, but he never replied. As each minute passed, Cordelia's worry grew stronger. By Friday, October 28th, after several days without any news, she went to the Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. She didn't have much information to give the authorities except for Michael's confusing account. The police wasted no time and launched an investigation. Detectives reviewed all the messages Cordelia had sent Bryce on the night he disappeared. Her panic was clear in the text, with each message showing her growing fear. Her distress seemed to strike a chord with the investigators. What started as a standard missing persons case quickly became something much darker and more complicated. Officers questioned Michael Ilix, but his statements were inconsistent and left too many unanswered questions. This led to further interviews with him. Meanwhile, investigators visited the storage facility where Bryce was last seen. What they found there only made the situation more mysterious. There were drag marks, like something heavy had been moved, and other pieces of evidence that added a sinister feel to the story. The deeper the police dug into the case, the more unsettling the details became. Bryce Burrell's disappearance wasn't just a simple case anymore. It had turned into a troubling enigma filled with fear and uncertainty. Cordelia, who initially trusted her father's story, started to doubt him as everything around her became increasingly strange and incomprehensible. Michael Elix knew he would be the first person the police would question after Cordelia reported Bryce missing. He tried to mentally prepare himself for the inevitable. That Friday, October 28th, officers tracked Michael down at a family Halloween party in Brainerd. He agreed to return with them to the storage facility and provide a more detailed explanation of what had happened on the day Bryce vanished. Despite this, the story only grew more complex. Each new detail uncovered by the police seemed to raise even more questions. The truth felt increasingly out of reach. Michael recounted the events, trying to include every detail. He explained that he and Bryce had arrived at the storage unit in a white Ford Escape with a trailer to go through some belongings after the long road trip he and Cordelia had recently taken. The task took about 45 minutes, with Bryce sorting through his items to decide what to keep and what to throw away. Around 5:45 p.m., they were getting ready to leave when something unexpected happened. As they started pulling out of the storage unit, two dark gray vehicles blocked their path. Michael described the cars as having flashing lights, but not the kind used by regular patrol cars. Instead, they looked like the lights often seen on unmarked law enforcement vehicles. This immediately made Michael suspicious and questioned if the people inside were legitimate authorities. According to Michael, both he and Bryce were briefly detained by these unidentified individuals. Michael was taken back to his white Ford Escape, while Bryce was placed in a different vehicle, a dark gray SUV. Michael remembered the COV's interior as plain, except for a small computer mounted on the dashboard. During the encounter, Michael said it seemed highly organized, involving several people. Bryce appeared to understand that this wasn't a random situation. Before they were separated, Bryce thanked Michael for his help, but didn't say anything else. Earlier that day, on the drive to the storage unit, the two men had barely spoken. When Michael asked Bryce about the road trip he and Cordelia had taken, Bryce had replied briefly, saying the drive was fine. Both men remained quiet and distant, showing little interest in starting a conversation. As detectives continued their investigation, they uncovered hints of tension within the family. Michael admitted that he felt uneasy around Bryce and was hesitant to spend time with him. This raised questions about why Michael had agreed to help Bryce with the storage unit in the first place, especially without Cordelia being there. Cordelia later explained that she had stayed home that day because she was too exhausted from the long road trip and needed to rest. From Michael's perspective, the trip to the storage unit had been routine until it was interrupted by the strange and unsettling encounter. He speculated that the events might be tied to some kind of trouble Bryce had gotten himself into, especially since Bryce had just returned to town after a lengthy road trip across the United States. Michael wasn't convinced. The mention of Arizona nagged at him. It was too specific to ignore. He pressed Cordelia further, asking why Bryce would be connected to Arizona or why it was relevant to his sudden disappearance. Cordelia hesitated, her eyes darting away as she stammered that it was nothing, just a passing mention. But Michael noticed the tremor in her voice and the way her hands fidgeted nervously. "You're hiding something," Michael said gently but firmly. "Cordelia, if you know anything about this, you have to tell me. This isn't just about Bryce, it could be about your safety too." Cordelia froze for a moment before lowering her gaze. "It's complicated," she muttered. Michael's patience was wearing thin, but he resisted the urge to raise his voice. "I don't care how complicated it is. Tell me what's going on." Finally, Cordelia relented. "There was someone we met on the road in Arizona, Bryce got involved," she began hesitantly. "Involved in what?" Michael asked, his heart sinking as he prepared for the worst. She shook her head. "I don't know everything, Dad. It was just supposed to be a simple deal. Some guy approached Bryce when we were at a diner, said he needed someone to deliver a package. Bryce thought it would be easy money. We were running low on cash and I didn't think it was a big deal." Michael felt his stomach twist. "What kind of package?" Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me and Bryce wouldn't let me see it. He just said it wasn't a big deal, that we drop it off and be done with it. But after that, things started happening. People started following us, leaving notes on the car. Bryce said he could handle it, but I was scared. Dad, I wanted to come home, but he insisted we finish the trip. Michael's mind raced. And when you came home early, was it because of this? Cordelia nodded slowly. Something happened. Bryce didn't tell me everything, but he said we had to leave right away. He looked terrified. Michael's instincts told him they were in over their heads. If Bryce had gotten tangled up in something illegal, it could explain his disappearance. But there was still so much Cordelia wasn't saying or didn't know. Did you ever see the man again? The one who gave Bryce the package. Cordelia shook her head. No, but Bryce got a call from someone after we got home. I don't know who it was, but after that he started acting even stranger. Michael exhaled, his mind piecing together fragments of a puzzle that still didn't make sense. Whoever Bryce had gotten involved with, it wasn't over. Okay, Michael said, trying to steady his voice. We're gonna figure this out. But you have to tell me everything, Cordelia. No more hiding things, no matter how bad they seem. Cordelia nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. As Michael embraced his daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both standing at the edge of something far darker than they had imagined. And for Bryce, wherever he was, time might be running out. Michael's mind raced as he processed Cordelia's revelation. Washington, what were you doing there? Cordelia hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. Bryce wanted to meet someone there, she said. He said it was important, something about tying up loose ends. I didn't ask too many questions because, well, he wasn't in the mood to explain. Do you remember where in Washington? Who he was meeting? Michael pressed, his voice tight with concern. I don't know exactly, Cordelia admitted. It was somewhere near Seattle. The guy seemed off. Bryce called him Jack, but I don't think that was his real name. Michael leaned forward, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Did you meet this Jack? What did he want? Cordelia nodded reluctantly. I saw him once. He was older, maybe in his late 40s or 50s. He gave Bryce something, a small package. Bryce told me to wait in the car while they talked. He didn't want me involved. Did Bryce ever tell you what was in the package? Michael asked. No, Cordelia said, her voice trembling. But after that meeting, Bryce started acting even more paranoid. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder, and talking about people following us. Michael's heart sank. Whatever Bryce had gotten involved in, it was serious. He realized that his daughter might be in more danger than she realized. Did Bryce ever say why he was so worried? Or what these people wanted? Cordelia shook her head. Not really. He just said that we needed to lay low and stay out of sight for a while. Michael stood up and began pacing the room. Cordelia, this is bigger than just Bryce disappearing. If he was involved with dangerous people, they might come after you too. We need to go to the police and tell them everything you know. Cordelia's eyes widened in fear. No, we can't do that, Dad. Bryce said they would kill us if we talked to anyone. Michael stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. He knelt in front of his daughter, gripping her shoulders gently. Listen to me, Cordelia. Keeping quiet isn't going to protect you. If these people are as dangerous as Bryce thought, they won't stop just because you stay silent. We need help. Cordelia hesitated, tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, Dad. I don't know what to do. Michael pulled her into a tight embrace. We'll figure this out together. But I need you to trust me. Okay? We'll find a way to keep you safe. As he held his daughter, Michael resolved to get to the bottom of the mystery, no matter the cost. Bryce's disappearance was just the beginning. Whatever secrets had been buried during their travels, Michael was determined to uncover them before it was too late. The tension was palpable as the investigation progressed. Michael, though cooperative, found himself increasingly under scrutiny. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies in his timeline, which only added to the air of suspicion surrounding the case. Cordelia, for her part, seemed trapped in a web of fear and loyalty. She admitted to the controlling nature of her relationship with Bryce, but still appeared reluctant to speak ill of him outright. Her hesitance frustrated both her father and the authorities. I don't understand, Michael confided to the lead detective one evening. I just want to help my daughter, but she's hiding something. Bryce's disappearance feels like a piece of a much larger puzzle. The detective nodded. That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Howard. But we need complete transparency from everyone involved. A new development just when it seemed the case had stalled. The police received a tip from a motel owner in Flagstaff, Arizona. The owner recognized Bryce and Cordelia from a photo circulated by investigators. He claimed they had stayed there for 3 nights about 2 weeks prior to Bryce's disappearance. The motel records confirmed that they had checked in under fake names and paid in cash. Surveillance footage showed Bryce frequently leaving their room late at night, sometimes returning with small packages. When confronted with this information, Cordelia broke down. Bryce was in trouble, she admitted tearfully. He owed money to people, dangerous people. That's why we were in Arizona. He said he needed to settle a debt. Debt? For what? Michael asked, his voice trembling. I don't know exactly, Cordelia replied, but he was desperate. He said if he didn't pay, they'd come after us. The revelation sent chills through Michael. It confirmed his worst fears that Bryce's disappearance was tied to something criminal. The missing phones. Investigators focused on tracking down Bryce's and Cordelia's phones, hoping they held vital information. After days of searching, they located one of Bryce's smartphones at a porn shop in Flagstaff. The device had been wiped clean, but forensic experts managed to recover fragments of data. Among the recovered messages was an exchange with a contact saved as J. The messages were cryptic but hinted at a deal gone wrong. Phrases like running out of time and they want more than we agreed painted a grim picture. The storage unit. Attention shifted back to the storage unit where Bryce was last seen. A thorough search revealed a hidden compartment in one of the walls. Inside, police found a burner phone and a small stash of cash. The burner phone contained a single unsent message. I'm out. Can't do this anymore. If you come near her, I'll make sure everyone knows. The message was time-stamped just hours before Bryce's disappearance. The unraveling. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, a troubling narrative emerged. Bryce appeared to be entangled in a smuggling operation, likely involving drugs or illegal goods. His sudden disappearance suggested he had either tried to back out of the arrangement or had been silenced. Cordelia, despite her loyalty to Bryce, seemed to be an unwitting accomplice. Her fear and evasiveness made sense in light of the danger they were in. Michael, meanwhile, remained determined to protect his daughter. But as reflected on the events leading up to Bryce's disappearance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still missing from the story. The deeper the investigation went, the more it revealed the tangled history between the Elix family and the tragic events surrounding Bryce and Cordelia. As authorities unraveled more details, it became clear that the relationship between father and daughter had a significant impact on the unfolding situation. Family dynamics and tensions. Michael's tight control over Cordelia's life was a growing point of concern. His mistrust of her choices, and especially his dislike for Bryce, painted a clearer picture of why Cordelia had been so eager to escape on her cross-country trip. While it had initially seemed like an innocent adventure, it was clear that the road trip served as an escape from the mounting pressures and tension at home. Cordelia's family dynamics were complex. Her mother's battle with Huntington's disease, combined with the challenges faced by her younger sibling, had created an already volatile household. But Michael's behavior, specifically his relentless pressure on Cordelia, had pushed her further away. Hiring a private investigator to follow her ex-boyfriend was just one example of the lengths Michael went to, showing how deep his mistrust ran. Investigators began to suspect that Michael's influence over his daughter had more to do with the conflict than Cordelia was willing to admit. She had wanted to break free, but in doing so, she had connected herself to Bryce, whose own life was full of uncertainties and struggles. Michael's admission. It wasn't until investigators confronted Michael about Bryce's phone that the truth started to come out. Initially, Michael denied any involvement with the phone, claiming he had never handled it. But after further questioning, he admitted that he had taken the phone from the car and disposed of it in a gas station trash bin in Brainerd the same evening Bryce disappeared. His reasoning was that he wanted to protect Cordelia from being tracked by whoever was behind Bryce's disappearance. The admission was a significant moment in the investigation. Michael had gone to great lengths to shield his daughter from what he believed was an even darker situation. But the authorities now wondered, was he protecting her? Or was he concealing something more troubling? Bryce, the dreamer with a hidden life. Bryce Brogel's background also added more layers to the investigation. Born in Brainerd in 1999, Bryce had always been a dreamer. At 23, he had aspirations of building a homestead in Alaska, hoping to live off the land and create a self-sufficient life. His relationship with Cordelia had started in February 2022, and the two had bonded over their shared love for adventure and the outdoors. Their trip across the country had been meant to give them the freedom they longed for, but as the investigation revealed, their relationship wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. While Bryce had envisioned a simple life, free of the constraints of society, he was also entangled in a world of danger and secrecy. His ties to people who could be dangerous were becoming clearer, and it appeared that his disappearance wasn't an accident. It was part of a larger, more sinister story. The search for truth as Michael's actions and the details of Cordelia's life began to surface. It became evident that there were more questions than answers. Was Michael's overbearing control over his daughter a catalyst for her getting involved with Bryce? Or had something darker been happening between them during their travels? Was Bryce's disappearance truly the result of a criminal operation? Or was it an elaborate ruse to disappear under the radar? As Cordelia clung to Bryce despite everything, the true nature of their relationship and the secrets they had been hiding began to emerge. And with each new piece of information, the authorities were no closer to understanding whether Bryce had been taken, or whether he had simply vanished on his own accord. As investigators dug deeper into Michael's past, his history with the law became an unsettling part of the investigation. His previous legal issues raised questions about his behavior and mindset. The revelation that Michael had been convicted of a crime involving a mentally incapacitated adult in 2018 raised doubts about his motivations and his sense of control in sensitive situations. This new information painted a complicated picture of Michael as a man with a troubled past and a tendency to act out of fear or anger. Despite Michael's attempts to explain his actions, his conflicting statements and inconsistencies had investigators questioning whether his motives were purely protective, or whether there was more to his involvement in Bryce's disappearance than he was letting on. Michael's anguish and helplessness were real, but his desire to protect his daughter might have clouded his judgment, leading him to make decisions that only complicated the investigation further. The strained relationship between Cordelia and Bryce was also critical in understanding what had happened. Michael's suspicions about Bryce's controlling behavior were not unfounded. He had witnessed firsthand how Bryce seemed to dominate every aspect of Cordelia's life, from monitoring her phone activity to manipulating her emotions. Michael had seen his daughter become increasingly withdrawn and submissive, which triggered his desire to intervene. However, his intervention, at least as far as investigators were concerned, seemed to have crossed a line between protection and control. As investigators continued to piece together the story, they found themselves questioning not only the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance, but also Michael's role in the family's turmoil. His background, his strained relationship with his daughter, and his increasingly erratic actions were beginning to paint a picture of a man who might have had more to do with the situation than he was willing to admit. Cordelia, for her part, remained conflicted and torn. On one hand, she loved Bryce and seemed to feel deeply connected to him, but on the other, she had witnessed the destructive dynamics of their relationship and felt trapped between the man she loved and her protective father. She found herself caught in a web of guilt, fear, and confusion, unsure of who to trust or what actions to take. But the more he spoke, the more his words seemed to raise doubts about his true role in the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance. Michael's repeated insistence on protecting his family and his strong emotions about Bryce's behavior added layers to the investigation. Despite passing the polygraph tests, investigators remained skeptical, knowing that polygraphs were not definitive proof of innocence. Michael's credibility was now under scrutiny, not just because of his personal history, but also because of his contradictory statements and behavior. The tense atmosphere during the interrogations was palpable. Michael's frustration grew as the investigators pressed him for answers, but he held his ground. He argued that while he had been angry with Bryce, his actions had never been meant to harm him. However, his words were sometimes at odds with the actions he had taken, throwing away Bryce's phone and expressing a desire to scare him off were not the actions of a passive bystander. These inconsistencies painted a picture of someone who might have been acting out of fear, but also out of a desire to control the situation. The fact that Michael had confronted Bryce multiple times about the bruises on Cordelia's face added to the complexity. He claimed that he had warned Bryce that any further harm to his daughter would result in consequences. But was this really an act of protection, or was it driven by something deeper, like a need for control over Cordelia's choices? Investigators were not convinced by Michael's explanations, especially since he kept referring to Bryce in the past tense, as if he had already accepted Bryce's disappearance as a fait accompli. His continued focus on his daughter's relationship with Bryce was not lost on the investigators, who now had to consider whether Michael was involved in a more direct way than he had let on. Michael Ilich's controlling relationship with his daughter Cordelia and his growing mistrust of her boyfriend, Bryce Bogle, set the stage for a tragic and violent crime. Concerned for Cordelia's well-being and fueled by suspicions of abuse, Michael's protective instincts transformed into frustration and anger. This led him to confront Bryce at his storage unit, where an argument turned fatal. Michael shot Bryce in the back of the head, claiming it was an impulsive act to protect his daughter. However, the evidence painted a darker picture. The investigators uncovered forensic evidence and testimony revealing a premeditated plan. Michael had previously threatened Bryce and told others he intended to kill him. A bleach bottle found in the storage unit contained both Bryce's and Michael's DNA, while a sled used to move Bryce's body was discovered with traces of blood. Phone records showed Michael's movements from the storage unit to a remote area near Edward Lake, where Bryce's body was eventually found buried. Despite Michael's claims of acting out of fear for Cordelia's safety, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. Testimonies revealed Michael's long-standing animosity toward Bryce and his belief that killing him was the only way to protect Cordelia, even though she denied any abuse. In April 2024, Michael was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case highlights the destructive power of fear, mistrust, and unresolved conflict, which led to the loss of a young man's life and the irreversible fracture of a family. It serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of addressing concerns through understanding and open communication, rather than resorting to violence. Story 6. Have you ever thought about how one wrong decision or a simple, innocent action can lead to a tragedy? Picture a couple deciding to go kayaking on one of the riskiest days of the year. What started as a fun adventure ended in a way so shocking, it's hard to comprehend. Where do we draw the line between an honest mistake and a fateful error? How can one small action or word change everything? By the end of the story, you might find yourself questioning every detail. Angelica's story is a chilling example of how life can change in an instant. The Hudson Valley, with its breathtaking scenery and swift rivers, is a magnet for outdoor enthusiasts. Kayaking is especially popular among thrill seekers, but the river is unforgiving. Even experienced athletes can make mistakes. Angelica Grawald and Vincent Viafer shared a love for the water, seeing it as a source of freedom and connection. On April 19, 2015, they set out on the Hudson River, excited for another adventure. The day began with promise, but the rising winds and rough waves were warning signs. Their goal was a small island with a castle steeped in Scottish-inspired mystery, a place that always captivated them. After a day exploring, evening fell and the situation grew dire. The waves were growing stronger, and the icy waters signaled danger. Staying on the island overnight without proper gear wasn't an option, so they decided to head back. As they paddled against the growing chaos, Vincent's kayak started taking on water. Without a life jacket and submerged in the freezing river, he was in critical danger. Angelica, in a panic, called emergency services, explaining through tears that she couldn't reach him because of the powerful waves pulling him further away. The dispatcher struggled to locate them, losing precious time. As rescuers scrambled to reach the scene, Vincent disappeared beneath the surface. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The dark, choppy waters showed no sign of Vincent, and the evening sky only deepened the despair. This tragic series of events is a haunting reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. Let's learn more about Angelica. At 35, she was an ambitious woman pursuing a career in photography, a passion she envisioned as her future. Born Angelica Lipska in Latvia, she longed for a better life beyond her homeland. After 2 marriages and divorces, her dream remained the same: to settle in the US, secure a work visa, and build a career. Her break came when she got a job as a nanny and moved to the States. Life took a dramatic turn when she met Vincent. Vincent, 46, was a successful construction professional who had also been through 2 divorces. Despite their age difference, their relationship blossomed quickly. Vincent was known for his generosity, hosting parties and enjoying a vibrant social life. It was at one of these gatherings that he met Angelica. Just weeks later, she moved into his home in Poughkeepsie, New York. Their relationship escalated rapidly, with talks of marriage and children becoming common. But under the surface, cracks were beginning to show. On April 18, 2015, just a day before the tragedy, the couple attended a party. While Vincent was lively and engaging with his friends, Angelica left early, citing that she wasn't feeling well. She seemed distant, interacting minimally and avoiding attention. Vincent's friends noticed a visible tension between the two, which led to a small but noticeable argument. Nothing major happened that night, and they went their separate ways until the next morning. The following day, Vincent proposed a kayaking trip, hoping it would help them reconnect and mend their strained bond. Despite the chilly weather and increasing wind, Angelica agreed. They planned to visit Bannerman's Castle, a historic ruin on an island in the middle of the Hudson River, where Angelica hoped to capture stunning photos. She even brought elegant outfits for a photo session, eager to make the most of the day. By noon, the couple was ready to set off, unaware of the tragic turn their day would soon take. At the water's edge, Angelica and Vincent prepared for what they thought would be another exciting adventure. The wind howled, growing stronger by the minute, and massive waves began to rise. The biting cold made every movement feel heavy. Angelica noticed the worsening weather, but Vincent's love for adrenaline and his stubborn determination kept them moving forward. Before they launched, Vincent said something Angelica would never forget: "This will be the adventure of your life." Those words would take on a haunting significance just hours later. The journey to Bannerman's Castle went smoothly at first. Angelica later told the police that they had shared a couple of beers before setting off, just to set the mood, but were careful to stay sober for the paddle back. Yet, despite their precautions, the return trip turned into a nightmare. The wind and waves intensified, and Vincent began to lag behind. He shouted that his kayak was taking on water. Angelica turned back and saw his kayak sinking. She tried to paddle toward him, but the powerful currents pulled her toward the shore. By the time she reached land, she frantically called emergency services, but Vincent had already vanished into the icy waters of the Hudson River. The evening of April 19, 2015, marked the start of a desperate search. Rescue teams worked through the night and into the next day. Divers plunged into the murky water, sonar-equipped boats combed the river, and helicopters scanned the area. Despite their tireless efforts, Vincent was nowhere to be found. His family and friends were devastated, clinging to the faint hope that he might have survived, though the odds were slim in such freezing water and against the strong currents. Amid the grief and panic, Angelica's behavior stood out. Unlike Vincent's loved ones, who were consumed with worry, she appeared unusually calm. She even continued to update her social media, posting photos and videos, as if nothing had happened. This deeply upset Vincent's family, who found her actions not only inappropriate but also suspicious. Angelica claimed she was holding on to hope, waiting for her fiancé to return, but her demeanor only widened the gap between her and the grieving relatives. 10 days after Vincent's disappearance, Angelica was called back to the police station for further questioning. The reason? A seemingly offhand comment she had made during her initial conversation with detectives, one that would raise even more questions about her role in the tragic events. Angelica made a startling admission during questioning. She mentioned that she might have accidentally removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak before they started paddling back. This small but critical detail changed everything, shifting the investigation from a tragic accident to something potentially sinister. Suddenly, investigators were asking more questions, and the idea of Vincent's death being purely accidental began to seem less plausible. Angelica also mentioned that Vincent's paddle had a broken locking ring, making it difficult to row properly. This, combined with the missing drain plug, raised alarms for investigators. Could these issues have been deliberate? The possibility of foul play was now on the table, but the big question remained why. To dig deeper, detectives turned to people who knew Angelica and Vincent. One key interview was with Angelica's ex-boyfriend, Michael Coven, who had lived with her years earlier. Michael was shocked to hear about the suspicions surrounding Angelica, but admitted that her calm demeanor sometimes masked a darker side. He described how Angelica could become confrontational during arguments, particularly when drinking a side of her Vincent reportedly tolerated quietly. More revelations came from Vincent himself. Just weeks before the tragedy, he confided in a friend that he was having second thoughts about marrying Angelica. He described her as manipulative and aggressive, particularly during moments of conflict. This information painted a picture of a relationship that was far from perfect. When detectives questioned Angelica further, she admitted there were conflicts in their relationship but insisted they were personal and unrelated to Vincent's death. However, her vague and ambiguous answers only heightened suspicions. Slowly, the narrative was shifting. Vincent's death seemed less like an accident and more like a deliberate act. The turning point came when investigators uncovered Angelica's potential financial motive. She was the primary beneficiary of Vincent's $500,000 life insurance policy, a sum that could solve her financial troubles and give her a fresh start. At the time of the tragedy, Angelica was unemployed, and this money represented a life-changing opportunity. This discovery transformed Angelica from a grieving fiancée to the prime suspect. Despite the growing evidence against her, she continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining that Vincent's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. The prosecution charged Angelica with second-degree criminal wrongdoing, leading to her arrest and a bail set at $9 million, a sum far beyond her means. Given her foreign nationality, investigators feared she might flee, so Angelica remained in custody as she awaited trial. Her defense team argued that her statements during the grueling 11-hour interrogation were not admissible as solid evidence. Angelica's attorney emphasized that Vincent's body had not yet been recovered, making it impossible to confirm any foul play or intentional wrongdoing. According to the defense, Vincent's death was a tragic accident. They suggested the kayak likely capsized due to a wave, and the drain plug might have come loose as a consequence, not as a cause. To support their claims, the defense conducted an experiment on the Hudson River. A man with a similar build to Vincent sat in an identical kayak model. The test revealed that even under calm conditions, the kayak sat very low in the water, just a few inches above the surface. The demonstration showed how large waves could have easily flooded the vessel, even without the drain plug issue. Adding to their case, the defense pointed out that Vincent had consumed alcohol before the trip, which could have impaired his coordination and reaction time. This, combined with the unstable kayak and rough conditions, might have led to the accident. With a flooded kayak, questionable confessions, and conflicting evidence, the case sparked heated debate. The investigation focused heavily on the drain plug, a tiny opening no larger than a fingertip. It was hard to believe such a small detail could have caused the kayak to sink. The drain plug on Vincent's kayak was located on top, making it unlikely that it could have allowed enough water to sink the vessel quickly. In response, the defense insisted on further testing. Using the same kayak model, a man of Vincent's size, and conditions that mirrored the fateful day, they conducted another simulation. The results were telling. Even with the drain plug removed, the kayak did not fill with water rapidly. The small hole allowed only a slow trickle of water, not nearly enough to capsize the vessel in a short period. These findings added significant doubts to the prosecution's theory. Without a recovered body or clear forensic evidence, the case against Angelica was increasingly built on circumstantial evidence and speculation. The defense's experiments revealed that even without the drain plug, Vincent's kayak could have easily made the 1-mile journey back to shore. This undermined the prosecution's claim that the missing plug alone caused the tragedy. When the theory about the plug fell apart, the prosecution shifted their focus to the paddle. Angelica had stated that Vincent's paddle was damaged, missing a locking ring. Investigators suggested that this might have hindered his ability to control the kayak. However, the defense countered this claim with another demonstration. They showed that the absence of the locking ring did not impact the paddle's functionality. It remained sturdy, effective, and fully operational. Despite this, the prosecution leaned heavily on Angelica's own admissions during her interrogation. She had admitted to touching both Vincent's paddle and the kayak's drain plug, which became central to the case against her. However, for investigators, these admissions seemed to support the idea of a premeditated crime. Even small details like touching the paddle or brushing against the plug were framed as deliberate actions. But Angelica's defense team argued that her words had been taken out of context, pointing to the intense psychological pressure she had endured during her 11-hour interrogation. To bolster their case, the defense brought in an expert on false confessions who reviewed the entire recorded questioning session. The expert argued that the police used techniques designed to elicit a confession through coercion. These included leading questions, the classic good cop, bad cop approach, and denying Angelica time to process what was happening. They also pressured her to repeat phrases that supported their narrative. During the interrogation, Angelica frequently appeared confused, her answers growing increasingly vague and her emotions unstable. The expert emphasized that she was in a state of shock and her statements should have been viewed with caution. One particular phrase became a focal point for the prosecution. Angelica had fleetingly mentioned that she had once thought about being free from her relationship with Vincent. Detectives interpreted this as a confession of intent to harm him. The defense, however, argued that the remark referred to the general strain in their relationship and was unrelated to the events of that day. The false confessions expert noted that at no point did Angelica use words like crime or death in relation to this statement. The police, however, chose to frame her vague comment as a direct admission of guilt, further fueling suspicions. The defense maintained that Angelica's admissions during the interrogation were not a reflection of the truth, but rather the result of manipulation by the investigators. Once the detectives heard statements they could use against her, they ignored her subsequent clarifications. The defense argued that Vincent's kayak had long-standing issues, including a faulty drain plug that had been a problem for months. Angelica claimed they had kayaked several times without the plug and it had never caused significant trouble. According to the defense, the true cause of the tragedy was the dangerous weather conditions that day, not any intentional actions. However, the prosecution insisted on their theory: a woman tired of her relationship, seeking financial gain, staging an accident to collect insurance money, and starting anew. Angelica's interrogation became a grueling ordeal. She lost track of time and felt trapped, cornered by the relentless questioning. Initially, she tried to stand firm, but the detectives kept circling back to the issue of the drain plug, gradually wearing her down. Her account of the plug's presence or absence became inconsistent, a confusion that the investigators capitalized on. The turning point came when Angelica, emotionally and physically drained, asked to leave so she could feed her cat at home. Tears welled up in her eyes, a moment of vulnerability that the detectives seized. They intensified their questioning, firing a series of leading inquiries designed to elicit incriminating responses. Despite her emotional state, Angelica never directly confessed to any crime. Still, the police refused to back off, interpreting her unclear answers as signs of guilt. An expert who later analyzed the interrogation footage noted that Angelica appeared overwhelmed, exhausted, and unable to think clearly. Her inconsistent responses were, in their view, typical of someone experiencing emotional and mental fatigue, not of someone admitting to wrongdoing. The expert explained that Angelica's primary motivation during the questioning was to bring the ordeal to an end, leading her to provide vague or muddled answers. Her unclear statements became the cornerstone of the prosecution's narrative, even though they were arguably the product of her desperation to escape the relentless interrogation. Vincent's disappearance left his family and friends in emotional turmoil, their grief compounded by uncertainty. Nearly a month later, on May 23, 2015, a boater found Vincent's body in the Hudson River near Bannerman's Island, where he and Angelica had gone that fateful day. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death as drowning, with no evidence of foul play or struggle. Vincent's blood showed traces of alcohol, though not enough to significantly impair him, suggesting the harsh weather and frigid water were the primary factors in his death. Vincent's kayak was also recovered, missing the drain plug and with a paddle lacking its locking ring. The defense maintained that these details were minor and insufficient to explain the tragedy. According to them, the real culprits were the extreme conditions that day: icy water, strong winds, the lack of a life jacket, Vincent's decision to venture out despite these risks. The prosecution, however, focused on Angelica's inconsistent statements, using them to build their case. They argued that Angelica had intentionally sabotaged the kayak, creating a scenario where Vincent had little chance of survival. Their theory painted her as a calculating woman, staging an accident for personal gain. Angelica's lawyer countered this by emphasizing Vincent's own choices. He had willingly gone kayaking under dangerous conditions, without proper safety gear, and while slightly under the influence of alcohol. These actions, the defense argued, pointed to his own recklessness rather than any malicious intent on Angelica's part. Despite these arguments, Angelica's behavior after Vincent's disappearance remained a sticking point for the prosecution. Her social media posts and calm demeanor were portrayed as suspicious, even though her defense claimed they reflected her unique way of coping with the tragedy. Angelica continued to assert her innocence, maintaining that the events of that day were nothing more than a heartbreaking accident. But as the legal battle unfolded, her statements, the missing drain plug, and the damaged paddle remained central to a case that divided public opinion and kept the spotlight on the mysterious circumstances of Vincent's death. The case took an unexpected turn when the prosecution decided to reevaluate its strategy. They realized that proving Angelica had intentionally caused Vincent's death would be nearly impossible to convince a jury. The theories surrounding the removed drain plug, or a broken paddle, were considered too circumstantial and speculative to establish intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Furthermore, the defense's arguments and expert testimonies significantly undermined the foundation of the prosecution's case. It became clear that the tragedy could have been the result of a combination of adverse weather conditions, faulty equipment, and poor judgment on Vincent's part, particularly his decision to kayak without a life jacket in dangerous conditions. Faced with these challenges, the prosecution opted to offer Angelica a plea deal if she admitted guilt to involuntary manslaughter. She would serve a reduced sentence of 4 years in prison, a far cry from the life sentence initially sought. The plea deal and sentencing Angelica accepted the deal, seeing it as a way to avoid the uncertainty of a trial that could have ended with a harsher punishment. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, because she had already spent significant time in custody while awaiting trial and during the court proceedings, her actual time left to serve was minimal. In December 2017, after serving 32 months, Angelica was released on parole. For Vincent's family, this outcome felt like an insult to their loss. They remained vocal about their dissatisfaction, believing that Angelica had orchestrated the events leading to Vincent's death. They viewed the plea deal as a failure of the justice system, allowing someone they deemed guilty to walk free after serving what they considered an inadequate sentence. Angelica's post-release struggles after her release. Angelica faced immense challenges. Public opinion in the U.S. was largely against her, and Vincent's family's public statements painted her in a negative light. Her guilty plea also barred her from claiming Vincent's $500,000 life insurance policy, which had been cited as a potential motive for the alleged crime. Furthermore, her status as a foreign national meant she was at risk of deportation. 16 months after her release, Angelica was forced to return to her home country. Back in her homeland, she attempted to rebuild her life. She enrolled in university, secured a job, and worked to move forward, leaving the traumatic events behind. Despite these efforts, the case continued to haunt her. In interviews, she maintained her innocence, insisting that Vincent's death was a tragic accident caused by circumstances beyond her control. Lingering questions and unresolved tensions, the conclusion of the legal proceedings did little to bring closure. Vincent's family remained adamant in their belief that Angelica was responsible for his death, unable to reconcile her actions before and after the tragedy with her claims of innocence. They were especially critical of her demeanor in the immediate aftermath of Vincent's disappearance, including her calm behavior and social media activity, which they found inappropriate and suspicious. On the other hand, Angelica defended her actions, claiming she was in shock and trying to maintain hope. She described her time in custody as harrowing and insisted that the confession she gave during the 11-hour interrogation was coerced and misunderstood. She continued to assert that only she and God knew the truth, and she expressed regret over the tragedy without admitting to any deliberate wrongdoing. Legacy of the case remained a topic of debate, with many questioning whether justice had been served. While the legal proceedings had concluded, the mystery of what truly happened on the Hudson River persisted. The tragedy served as a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of nature, the consequences of poor judgment, and the devastating impact of unresolved questions surrounding sudden loss. Even after returning to her home country, Angelica's life was forever altered. She became a polarizing figure, with some sympathizing with her plight, and others believing she had escaped true accountability. For Vincent's family and friends, the pain of his loss lingered, compounded by their frustration with the justice system and their enduring suspicions about Angelica's role in his death. And the night deepens. Thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.